Okay, hold on. I'm here. This isn't one of those situations where if the teacher doesn't show up within 5 minutes, that the class is canceled. That's not true. It's not real. I don't know who keeps telling people that. Hello and welcome to the Sharkstream Book Club. It's me. It's Gage. Can you believe it? Back at it again. Here on the book club today. Today. So I've streamed, I don't know how many times I've actually streamed Alan Wake at this point. I can tell you in just a moment, because I have a playlist of all the times I've streamed Alan Wake, in fact. Let's see if we can't get that pulled up real quick. Let's just let the... I need to turn that down a little bit. That's a bit loud in my ears. Let Petryalenko's... Petri? I'm going with Petri. Petryalenko's beautiful score for the video game serenade you while I'm looking up how many times I've streamed Alan Wake. It's got to be in here somewhere, right? Hold on. When's the last time I streamed it? The last time I streamed it would have been the when the remaster dropped. Pretty sure. Yeah, calm down. I'm working on it. Here we go. So, let's see. That's once, twice, 3 times in the current era of Sharkstreams. I've streamed it multiple times before then. But let's see. I did once was just kind of a normal stream going from Alan Wake into Alan Wake American Nightmare. And then I did it again when the AWE DLC for Control was coming out. And then I did it when the remaster dropped. So I've streamed this game in the current era of Sharkstreams 3 times. And every time I audibly express the possibility of streaming again, Natalie gets mad at me and says, "You can't keep streaming Alan Wake." But it doesn't count if it's the book. This is a different thing. No, I'm not... Natalie doesn't actually get mad at me. But here's the thing. Alan Wake 2 is coming out this year. And I could not possibly be more excited. Hello, Speedstar. I could not possibly be more excited for the fact that Alan Wake 2 is coming out this year. I'm doing pretty good. Welcome to the Sharkstream. Good to see you. And I wanted to make sure that I covered as much as possible R.E. Alan Wake before the sequel drops. And I thought, briefly, about streaming the game again. But I have streamed that game a lot at this point. And, I thought, how about to shake things up, rather than stream the video game, I could do a book club of the novelization. You see, back in this era of gaming, like, you know, the late 2000s, and honestly even before then, like, it's novelizations of video games are not like a brand new thing. And they weren't at the time that this one came out. But they were pretty popular around that time. Like, it wasn't so much like these days where you get, like, spin-off novels of everything. You know, like, how many fucking Halo books are there now? A new one, like, just came out. I think The Arbiter's in it. I might need to get it. You've got, like, the 3 Dishonored books, which I also need to read when I start playing that series. But there was a time when, like, actual novelizations of the games themselves were fairly common. You know, you had Halo the Flood, for example. You had novelizations of the Resident Evil games, with a bit of, you know, punching up because SD Perry wanted to. You had novelizations of Doom games. Games that ostensibly don't have any story beyond, like, a couple, like, text screens. Like, at the beginning and end. There's not a whole lot there, and yet they wrote whole-ass novels about this. Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 had, US-written novelizations. If you can ever get your hands on the novelization of Metal Gear Solid 1, it's fucking wild. I would highly recommend it. And Alan Wake happened to be one of the games that ended up getting a novelization from Rick Burroughs, which is a little odd. You know? Because, like, within the context of Alan Wake, so within the context of Alan Wake, right? Alan Wake himself writes a novel called Departure, which is just the events of the video game. Which, due to the, like, you know, powers at work with, like, you know, the dark place, the dark presence, and everything, all comes true. So, technically speaking, wouldn't a novelization of Alan Wake just be the in-game book Departure? Realistically speaking? It's not written like that. Which seems like a missed opportunity, honestly. I guess I can't... I suppose I wouldn't really be able to, like, give Remedy a lot of shit for that, because this is probably, like, a Microsoft decision. Because we all hopefully know, while Alan Wake and, like, Remedy games these days are, like, hardcore multi-platform, with Alan Wake Remastered finally bringing the game to Sony and Nintendo systems. Prior to that, that game was made as part of Microsoft Game Studios. That was a Microsoft product. Well, it ended up being a Microsoft production. I don't think it started that way. I don't remember exactly how. It's kind of like Halo, where, like, Halo started off as, like, a fucking... Oh God, what did Halo start? Halo was going to be a game for Macintosh computers. Can you imagine the world where we would be as a society if Halo came out on Macintosh computers as opposed to the original Xbox? Wild to consider, to say the least. But yeah, video game novelizations. Oh shit. Did I get this from... I opened this up, and I must have forgotten about this. I guess I got this signed while I was... Okay. I talk about this every fucking time I do anything with Alan Wake. I won a contest to visit Remedy Games in Finland back in 2010. I went there, it was great, I got to see a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, I got my name in the credits of the game because I found a bug when I was previewing previewing the DLC that hadn't come out yet. And I ended up coming out of that with, like, a lot of signed stuff. I have the Xbox 360 I still use is signed by a few members of Remedy. I have a poster that's signed by the guys at Remedy. My copy of the collector's edition of the game is signed by them. I guess the book must have been signed. It just says, "Thank you for visiting Remedy, best the Remedy team." So I guess at that point it was just like they had already signed enough. They weren't going to put all their names on one more thing. They had already done a lot for me at that point, to be fair. And I appreciate that. I appreciate everything about them, and I appreciate their hard work. Video game novelizations are kind of known on occasion for being a little weird. I mentioned how fucking buck wild the Metal Gear Solid novelization is. The Doom novelization is also pretty fucking wild as well. And then, like, the Halo books, a lot of them are actually really good, you know? There's maybe a little bit of military child experimentation, apologization, apologization? What's the word? When you're, like, it's like defensive, where it's just like, oh yeah, you know, we shot these kids up with steroidal cocktails and essentially emotionally imbues them into being killing machines, but, like, you know, the aliens invaded, so it worked out well in the end. It's fine. There was a lot of that in, like, the early stuff. But yeah, let's go ahead and get going with the book, shall we? Oh, has that been going the whole time? Let's get that started over. Hold on. Restart playback when source becomes active. Let's go with that. Actually, no. I'll just pause it. I'll pause it when we go to the recap zone. So this is Alan Wake, novelization of Alan Wake by Rick Burroughs. Prologue. Wake didn't see the hitchhiker until it was too late. It was night, and he was tired, driving down the coastal road toward the lighthouse, driving too fast as usual. The hitchhiker seemed to appear right out of the darkness, standing there in the middle of the road, just staring into Wake's oncoming headlights. Wake didn't even have time to hit the brakes, reacting only after he heard the thump of metal against flesh. Shaken, head pounding, Wake got out of the car to check on the hitchhiker. The front end was splattered with blood, the hood crumpled. Steam rose from the crushed radiator. Wake bent over the body of the hitchhiker, the two of them caught in the headlights now as though on stage. The man was dead. Wake put his hand on the hitchhiker's bloody clothes, wanting to apologize, to explain, to ask the man why he had just stood there, unmoving, as Wake hurtled at him. This man be hurtling. Why he doing that? It wasn't the hitchhiker who was going to have to explain his actions, though. There were no skid marks on the road, Mr. Wake, the police would say. Why didn't you slam on the brakes? Didn't you see him? You're a writer. Were you distracted? Maybe thinking about your next book? Just for the record, exactly how fast were you going, Mr. Wake? Had you been drinking before the accident? Taken any pills? You look tired. I'm not going to give every character a goofy voice. I'm going to try and, I've played through this game enough that I remember the characters' voices pretty well. So, I'm gonna shoot for but that's just a random cop in Wake's imagination. So he gets a goofy voice. A raven cried, "Ah, fuck!" Locopool is now following. Locopool, thank you for the follow. Welcome to the Sharkstream Book Club. I hope you have a good time. Thanks for scaring the shit. God! Gamer Tarasu is now following. Thank you for the follow. And scaring the shit out of me again. Welcome to the Sharkstream Book Club. A raven cried out from a nearby tree, and Wake turned, seeing only its eyes in the darkness. Follower jump scare. When he looked back, the hitchhiker was gone, disappeared. Wake actually put his hand onto the spot where the hitchhiker had been lying, feeling around as if he might find a hole, a deflated, blow-up hitchhiker, some sort of insurance scam fake-out, something. There was nothing, and nobody there. Just the pavement, cool in the night air. Wake stood, knees shaking. He looked around, then pushed the car to the side of the road. It was a write-off. He started walking toward the lighthouse in the near distance, trying to stay upright, to stay steady. The man had been there. Wake had hit him. Killed him. So where was the body? I would be scared too if I saw that cat, to be honest. That is my darling daughter, Calamity. She's a very good girl, even if she's not too smart sometimes. Excellent problem-solving skills, though. Wake turned back. His car was still there, water leaking onto the pavement, the hazard lights flashing against the night. Up ahead, a streetlight lit up a wooden pedestrian walkway that wound its way to the lighthouse. He still wasn't sure what he was going to tell the police when he reported the accident. A streetlight exploded as Wake walked under it. Son of a bitch, he thought, covering his head as tiny bits of broken glass drifted down around him like snow. He looked back again to his car. Froze. The hitchhiker was there, standing in front of the car, covered in blood and shadows. He had something in his hand, an axe. He strode toward Wake. Wake couldn't move. A streetlight farther down the road exploded, then another, and another still. You don't even recognize me, do you? Said the hitchhiker, disgusted. You think you can play with people's lives? Kill them when it adds to the drama? He hefted the axe, his clothes spotted with gore. Well, you're in the story now, Wake, and you're going to suffer for your art. Let's see how you like that. Wake recognized the hitchhiker now. He was a character in a story Wake had written when he was first starting out. An innocent man run down at the start of the story, a driver walking away in the night. He had never finished the story, but his character had now escaped off the page and was coming for vengeance. Wake started to run, his feet pounding on the wooden walkway as he raced towards the lighthouse. "What's your hurry?" mocked the hitchhiker, coming after him. "I thought you liked horror stories." Wake kept running, his footsteps drumming on the wooden slats, the lighthouse a beacon in the night. "What kind of writer are you?" called the hitchhiker. The planks in the walkway were cracked and weathered, whole sections missing so that Wake had to jump over the gaps. Up ahead was a rickety footbridge that stretched over a chasm. The ocean crashed on the boulders below in a spray of foam. This is oddly entertaining for someone who's not really into books. I mean, it's kind of like, imagine like you were listening to an audiobook, but like you were kind of like part of the experiment of like making the audiobook. You know? Or it's just like, you can just like ask questions while I'm reading. And like, I'll still react to chat and everything. But like, I've actually had people mention that, like, you know, my streaming, doing these book club streams, especially with regards to like doing sort of the recap after chapters, going over information we learned and stuff like that, has really helped them with like paying attention to some of these stories, which honestly is great. You know, I'm really happy to help with that sort of thing. "Mr. Wake!" A young man in a college letterman's jacket waved from the far side of the footbridge. "Hurry!" Wake glanced behind him. The hitchhiker was closing in, the axe cleaving the air. "Hurry, Mr. Wake!" shouted the young man. Wake ran. Partway across the bridge, his leg broke through one of the rotting planks. He clung to the railing, pulled himself up. He limped across the remainder of the bridge. The young man grabbed his arm, led him toward a dark cabin at the base of the lighthouse. "It's me, Mr. Wake! Clay Stewart! Don't you remember?" "I don't know you." Wake shook him off. "You're a joke, Wake!" shouted the hitchhiker halfway across the bridge. "Get inside," said Stewart, pushing Wake up the steps of the cabin. "Turn on the lights. I'll stop him." Wake rushed into the cabin and fumbled for the light switch. He cried out as the door slammed shut behind him. Through the window, he could see Stewart standing by the front porch holding a revolver as the hitchhiker approached. "Stewart!" shouted Wake. "Get in here!" "Stay where you are, Mr. Wake," said Stewart, voice cracking. "Just put all the lights on." "Come inside." Wake tugged at the door, trying to open it, but it stayed shut. "Stewart!" I got like a weird itch. Give me a second. The hitchhiker rushed at Stewart, swinging the axe with both hands. Wake struggled against the door, but couldn't budge it. Stewart fired the revolver. The bullets staggered the hitchhiker for an instant, but he shrugged it off. Stewart fired again. Why won't you die?" Stewart wailed, emptying the revolver, each shot hitting the hitchhiker. Wake watched as the hitchhiker hurtled forward and drove his axe deep into Stewart's chest, splitting the gold letter on the young man's jacket. Stewart let out an awful moan and sank to his knees. "No!" shouted Wake, beating on the window so hard it vibrated. The hitchhiker braced his foot against Stewart's chest and jerked the axe free. Its steel head dripped blood. Stewart fell forward onto his face. The hitchhiker lifted the axe again, swung it down with all his strength into the center of the young man's back. Wake finally found the light switch. He flicked it on, but the light stayed off. He flicked the switch off and on, but the cabin remained dark. The hitchhiker wrenched the axe blade out of Stewart's back and started to slowly walk up the stairs to the front door of the dark cabin. The cabin began to shake gently at first, then harder and harder, grinding on the foundation as though gripped by some enormous hand. The hitchhiker had disappeared from the front porch as though his work were done and he was no longer needed. There was a roaring in his ears, and Wake wasn't sure if it came from outside the cabin or inside his own head. The windows slowly cracked, then blew out, the wind howling through the cabin. The door flew open, upending furniture, scattering papers. The cabin groaned, started to come apart. Light poured in through the collapsing walls, and Wake ran down the front steps, onto the dead grass around the cabin, out into the light. The roaring sound was gone now. Wake blinked, and a powerful light that hovered over him caught. There was a form inside the light, a man, a space explorer, a deep-sea diver. The figure spoke to him, the voice sounding like it was coming from a great distance away, as though the diver was struggling to be heard. "I have something important to tell you." Wake tried to speak, but the light, it was too bright, scattering his thoughts. "It goes like this. For he did not know that beyond the lake he called home, lies a deeper, darker ocean green, where waves are both wilder and more serene. To its ports I've been, to its ports I've been. Do you understand? An ocean green? No, said Wake. I have no idea what you're talking about. I entered your dream to teach you. The darkness is dangerous. It's sleeping now, but when it feels you coming, it will wake up. What will wake up? Wake looked around. The hitchhiker was back, the bloody axe in his hand. He stood on the very edge of the light, just inside the darkness, eager to cross over. As Wake watched, the darkness grew blacker, more intense, shiny as oil. Wake looked back at the diver. You are safe in the light. The darkness cannot hurt you there. The light flickered, and Wake screamed. Okay. Left over from Dead Space. Hold on one second. Okay. Where is that chalk? Ah, here we go. Okay, let's just get this out of here. Okay. So, the Alan Wake novelization is a little bit different from our usual fare here on the book club. You see, normally what we cover is we cover spin-off books. Books where, like, the stories are supplemental to the games that we've played. You know, Darksiders The Abomination Vault, being a story about death and war and just, like, essentially just kind of like a side story within the Darksiders universe. Or Dead Space Martyr being a prequel to the Dead Space series that tells the sort of origins of Unitology, the Black Marker, and just where everything kind of spun out of control, right? This is a bit different because this is just a straight-up novelization of the game. So a lot of the events that we're going to be covering are events that we've seen before. Maybe we have like a new perspective on them in one way or another. You know, maybe the voice of the author gives us a new way to think about it. But otherwise, like, this is just the game, bro. This is just the video game. This is the game, but in book form. It's paper, it's pulp, it's ink. It's I don't know what, like, paperback covers are made out of. Some kind of cardstock? It's very nice. It's very smooth. I'm rubbing it on my face. Kind of feels good. Ooh, right there. Okay. All right. What was I talking about? So this is, of course, the part of the game where it's the beginning. Wake's in the middle of his nightmare. His nightmare where he is under attack by the creations of his work. Sort of a representation of his anxieties with regards to how he hasn't fucking written anything in a while. What am I trying to say here? Both, here we go. This is the game downloaded in a dead tree. Yeah, basically. So the dream is both a premonition and a manifestation of Wake's anxieties. Yes, Wake is essentially haunted day in and day out, that by the time of finishing his final book in the Alex Casey series, you know, The Sudden Stop, he has, at this point, not written shit nor fuck for, like, a couple years, I think, if I recall how the timeline of this game works. And you know, he's got this idea in his head, just like, oh, I want to write this book. It's gonna be called Departure. It's gonna be a departure from the norm for me. And he's just like, he's really, really like into this idea of this new story that he's going to tell, but he can't fucking come up with anything for it, right? But the dream is also premonition, because it's not just Wake being attacked by a character from a story that he hasn't finished, being kind of manifestation of his anxieties with regards to feeling like a fraud, feeling like he's a hack writer, that sort of thing. It's also just essentially foreshadowing for what he's going to be dealing with, being attacked by creatures from a story that he's written, bathed in darkness, thirsting for blood. You know? Now, there's a character in this sort of prologue chapter. Give me 1 second. I need to plug my phone in. There's a character here that, if you're not familiar with sort of like the greater, what's the word I'm looking for? Universe, the greater canon of Alan Wake. Like, if you're not familiar with anything beyond the game, you may be kind of confused as to his presence, both in the book and in the game itself. It's your boy, Clay Stewart. Clay Stewart is kind of, let's call him an expanded universe character. Which is very funny for me to say, considering that we're talking about this was all like material that was available at the time that the game came out. But you had to get the collector's edition. Not for anything particularly important, but so that you could get the Alan Wake files. Now, the Alan Wake files is something that we are also going to be reading as part of this book club. Once we have finished the actual story itself, because the Alan Wake files, canonically, are published after the events of Alan Wake. It is an in-universe written work by Clay Stewart. And we're not talking like, oh, this is something that is like of dubious canon or anything like that. No, the Alan Wake files is actually referenced in Control, which, as I would hope we all know by now, was a stealth sequel to Alan Wake, setting up Alan Wake 2 as well. So Clay Stewart in the game, and as a consequence in this book, in this novelization, is really just a side character present in the dream, to be just sort of like, who is this guy? And then he immediately gets killed in said dream. But when we get to the Alan Wake files, we'll learn a lot more about him and about what his place in this greater series is, like this greater fiction, right? We've also got our friend, the mysterious spaceman, the deep sea diver, who we're obviously going to learn a lot more as we go through this book. But right now, he seems, and I have to say he seems because of things that we learn in Control about this particular character, he seems to have Alan's best interests in mind, right? Like, on the surface, he appears to be a good guy. I tell you a joke about toilet paper, but it's terrible. Sorry for making jokes. Just can't help it. That's good. That's a solid pun. But he seems to have Alan's best interests in mind. He is pretty firmly part of the premonition aspect of this dream. He's the one that's making it a premonition in the first place. He's warning Alan about what is about to happen. And speaking of what is about to happen, let's find out. Chapter 1. Alan? Wake heard Alice calling to him through his nightmare. He slowly floated up towards the sound of her voice, still drowsy. Alan, wake up! Come see where we are. It's so beautiful. Wake opened his eyes, squinting in the sunlight. Through the car's open window, he saw Alice beckoning from the nearby railing of the ferry. She wore tight jeans and black boots, her light brown hair billowing over the upturned collar of her black leather jacket. Whatever she was looking at, it wasn't nearly as beautiful as what he was seeing. Her ass! Oh. Sorry. That was me punching things up. She waved again and he got out of the car and walked back across the deck towards her, feeling the low engine vibration through the soles of his feet. I didn't want you to miss this, said Alice, pointing. It took an effort to tear his eyes from her, but he followed her direction, saw an immense forest stretching out on each side of the water, the biggest trees he had ever seen, so tall and thick he couldn't see the forest floor. You have got to tell me what kind of magnificent trees you've got around here. Douglas firs. Douglas firs. I'm sorry. Alan Wake is one of those games where it's just like, I really liked it, and then eventually I watched Twin Peaks. I'm just like, oh, that's where literally all of this comes from. Alan Wake and Deadly Premonition, like two sides of the same coin there, where it's just like, hey, have you seen Twin Peaks? If you haven't, at this point you may as well have. Highly recommend Twin Peaks, by the way. Old-growth timber, said Alice. Hundreds of years old. Never been cut. Not much of that left anymore. Forest primeval, I get it, said Wake. Welcome to Sasquatch country. Ooh, are you a squanch man, Alan? Like you some squatches? He looked down at the dark green water churning around the ferry. He buttoned up his gray tweed coat. Even with the hoodie underneath, underneath he was shivering. The sun seemed to seek Alice out, but he was always cold. Wake's face was long and angular, with a cleft in his chin and 3-day stubble like a rock star on a bender. His eyes were blue, very alert, volatile even. He told Alice once that if he had a tattoo, it would read, "Born Pissed Off." She told him he needn't bother. One look at him and people figured that out fast enough. I can't believe Alice Wake told her husband he has resting bitch face. A fallen tree drifted up ahead, a gnarly elm bobbing gently along on the currents. Its thick trunk and broad leaves made it seem out of place among all the tall timber, and Wake, ever curious, wondered how it ended up here. What had torn it out by the roots? A huge raven perched atop one limb, fluttering its glossy black wings as it pecked at something. Peck, peck, peck. Wake leaned forward, straining to see what the raven was so interested in. The raven cocked its head, and as though aware of Wake's gaze, then bent down, pulling up something white and stringy in its beak. We should be arriving in Bright Falls in about 20 minutes, said Alice, basking in the light. The raven's greedy cawing echoed across the water as the elm drifted closer, and Wake finally saw what the raven was working at. A child's tennis shoe caught in the branches, the bird tugging at the laces. Alice turned as the raven flapped off. Wow, that's one gigantic crow. Yeah, Wake said softly. Honey, are you okay? You look so pale. Just my imagination messing with me, as usual. Wake ran a hand through his dark hair. She worried about him, worried about his moods, and especially about his temper. He gave her reason to. In the distance, he could make out the outlines of a small town nestled in the bay. Had to be Bright Falls. Alice took her camera from her purse. Why don't you stand next to that old guy beside the pickup? I'll take a picture of you with the woods in the background. You know I hate having my picture taken, said Wake. Suffering is good for the soul, Alice said playfully. Don't you want to get to heaven? Not unless you're there with me, teased Wake. Well, I'm staying here, said Alice. You're the one who's going over there so I can snap a picture. I hope I don't need to have played the games just so I understand this book. No, not really. Like I said, the book is basically just the events of the game in book form. So by reading the book, you essentially get the entire sort of like essence of the game itself, basically. Wake walked over to the older man. The bed of the blue pickup had a fresh deer carcass in it. Cute. He looked at the older man. Hi. You picked a good time to visit... fucking shit! God damn you, Pat Maine! You picked a good time to come to Bright Falls, confided the older man, a short, balding fellow with his watery blue eyes crinkling behind round glasses. Really? Said Wake. Alice waved at him to move closer to the man. Yup, a very good time. Uh-huh, said Wake. The man pushed his glasses with a forefinger. I mean, lucky you! Wake took a deep breath. The persistence of geezers was a universal constant, as certain as gravity or the speed of light. Okay, why am I lucky? The older man showed his dentures in triumph. Deerfest is just 2 weeks away. Deerfest, huh? Said Wake, having no idea what the man was talking about. Did you hear that, honey? Deerfest. Forgive my bad manners. I'm Pat Maine. The man stuck out his hand. I'm Alan... Oh, I know who you are, Mr. Wake, said Maine, pumping away with his damp, pillowy hand. We read books around here, too. He smiled at his little joke. When's that next novel of yours coming out? Seems like we've been waiting. Working on it, snapped Wake. Of course, can't rush the creative process, can you? Said Maine. I hope this isn't too presumptuous of me, but I'm the night host at the local radio station. Any chance I could get an interview? Best-selling author doesn't come through these parts very often, and I'm on vacation with my wife, said Wake, trying to keep a low profile. I understand completely, said Maine, winking. Still, you change your mind. I'm an easy man to find. Wake walked back to Alice. I got some good shots, said Alice, pushing her hair back. Nice to see you making friends. Yeah, we swapped bundt cake recipes, said Wake. Alice lightly punched him in the arm. Wouldn't be the worst thing that could happen. You might actually enjoy yourself. Wake didn't respond. He stood shoulder to shoulder beside her at the railing, eyes half closed, enjoying the sensation of her wind-blown hair tickling his face. He had lied to Pat Maine about his next book. He hadn't written a word in 2 years, and had no idea if he would ever write again, but standing beside Alice, Wake put aside all thoughts of the books he had written, and the books he might never write. Put aside the frustration that tore at him night and day. There was just him and Alice. That was enough. For this one perfect moment, that was all he needed. His music is maybe getting a little intense for, like, this kind of nicer scene here. But, hey, I didn't organize this playlist. Oh, yuck, said Alice softly. What? Said Wake, not wanting to look, wanting to stay where he was, smelling her perfume and forgetting everything else. By the way, if the music ever seems too loud and like it's hard to hear me over it, just let me know and I'll go ahead and crank it down a bit. I say as it comes in with the loudest fucking piano chord I've ever heard. There's the creepiest guy watching us, said Alice. Wake opened his eyes, the perfect moment gone now, popped like a soap bubble on a summer afternoon. He saw a grubby man in his 40s staring at them from the far end of the ferry, an insolent grin on his face. The man wore camouflage pants and a hunting vest, a stained ball cap, and scuffed work boots. A cigarette dangled from his lower lip. He started walking slowly toward the man. Do you have a problem? Wake challenged, raising his voice to be heard over the rumbling engines. The man didn't react, just took a long, slow drag on his cigarette. He kept staring. Alan, don't, said Alice. Stay here. This is no way to start a vacation. Wake allowed Alice to steer him back to their car, neither of them saying a word until they were both inside. You scare me sometimes, said Alice. Wake watched a vein at the base of her throat pulse, angry at himself for upsetting her. I'm sorry. Men like that, they're not worth worrying about, said Alice. She squeezed his... I love how when, like, I flub a line, I turn into Jar Jar Binks in that one scene of The Phantom Menace where he gets fucking static shocked by the goddamn power coupling between the pod racer engines. I think about that scene a lot. Jar Jar Binks is awful. What a bad character. Where was I? Okay. Right, she was squeezing his hand. She squeezed his hand. You just have to learn to back away. I can't do that, said Wake. The world will eat you alive if you let it. That's not true, said Alice. Most people are good. Wake snorted. Alan Wake, they most certainly are. What about the ones who aren't good? Said Wake, looking past her as the town came clearly into view, a collection of bright storefronts and a few small houses scattered across the surrounding hills. People in cars waited at the ferry dock. He turned back to her. What about the ones who want to hurt us? Why would anyone want to hurt us? Wake reached over and kissed her. Envy. Who wouldn't want what we have? Alice kissed him back, her lips warm and pouting. Well, they can't have it. Alice drove the car off the ferry and onto the dock, past the fishermen lining the railing and people waiting to board. There was a chill in the air now, clouds building up on the horizon. Locals in quilted jackets clomped down the sidewalk, eating ice cream cones, enjoying the sunshine. No seagulls, which was odd, since they usually hovered around the waterfront, looking for scraps and leftovers. No seagulls, just ravens, watching from the roofs and power lines. Wake shivered. It's nice, isn't it? Said Alice. Quaint. No one seems to be in a hurry. Wait until Deerfest, said Wake. The place will be throbbing with activity. See, I knew you were going to like it here, said Alice. Don't get carried away, said Wake. I was just kidding. That's what I mean, said Alice. Your sense of humor. It's coming back. I'm so happy. These last couple of years, you got so serious. Well, these last couple of years, things were serious, said Wake. Not today, though. Today, we're going to pick up the key to our cabin and officially start the vacation. If you're good, very, very good, I'll take you to Deerfest and let you pet Bambi. You need to take a look around and see where you are, city boy, teased Alice. Necromiris, thank you for the follow. Welcome to the Sharkstream. Around here, they don't pet Bambi. They eat Bambi. Or they eat him. She doesn't specifically say Bambi. That's the end of the chapter. So, all right. So let's talk about this. Hello, what did I just walk into, Gage? This is the Sharkstream Book Club. And today we are reading the Alan Wake novelization. We have just finished Chapter 1 and are just working on recapping. Hello, Ion Agenda. Welcome. Alright, so... we've met a few more characters. We haven't really gotten a chance to... My bad, it's me, Thorns. Oh, hello. Welcome. Another name change, then? Such is life. Such is life. So we haven't really gotten a chance to talk about our boy Alan Wake yet. Appropriately summed up by his own tongue with "born pissed off." Now, yeah, just returning to my roots of death theming. Nice. Now, that's a bit of an oversimplification of his character. Alan Wake is a writer who wrote an incredibly popular series of books called the Alex Casey series, right? Going through some horrible writer's block right now, and unfortunately, that's causing his mood to basically plummet. It's causing his anger issues to flare up and stuff like that. But I mean, his entire personality isn't born pissed off. We're going to be seeing later on, the book's going to follow the events of the game and everything, so we will get flashbacks to when he was not born pissed off. Thank God he wasn't born pissed on. God. I was going to make that joke, and I thought, no, that's too crass. But you just went and did it, huh? You took that bullet for me. Thank you. Okay. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So Alan Wake is our main character. We'll of course learn more and more about him as the story goes on. We have also, at this point, met our girl, Alice Wake. Now, Alice Wake, how to describe Alice Wake? Alice Wake's purpose in the story. Like, okay. It's kind of unfortunate to try and discuss Alice because Alice Wake's purpose of the story is that she gets kidnapped. Like, spoiler alert, she's gonna get kidnapped. It's kind of the whole thing. Like, this was a Where's My Wife game, you know? But Alice Wake, her whole thing is, you know, she's kind of just there to be like Alan's morality pet, you know? The one who keeps him in line for the purposes of the narrative, right? In the sort of like short time that we get to know her at the beginning of the game, she's really just kind of like, yeah, Alan, we're gonna have such a good time, ha ha ha, teases you, pokes fun at you, lovingly, blah 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 blah, don't like darkness, scared of darkness, damsel in distress. Yeah, that's what she is, realistically speaking. And like, I don't want to... Alan Wake as a story has a lot of like really good characters in it, and including like, you know, a decent cast of like female characters as well, as much as like the male characters, you know? So I don't want it to sound like I'm kind of like talking shit on Alice Wake by calling her the damsel in distress. It's that kind of story. She fulfills that archetype for the character within the story. She's kind of like this ultimate good. She's too good for Alan. He feels like she's too good. She's too good for him. He doesn't understand, like it's part of his kind of like circle of self-loathing, you know? We do get a lot more time with her in some of the flashbacks, especially flashbacks later on that kind of show her clashing against some of the uglier parts of Alan's personality. I won't get into too much details because, like I said, we will see that later. But suffice to say, she's not some sort of like wilting flower. Like, she's not somebody, she doesn't like retreat into herself whenever Alan's like temper flares up. No, she stands her ground and she lets him know, hey, you're being a dick right now. She's a photographer. She has an artistic eye. We get a little bit of information about that in Alan Wake's American Nightmare, the spin-off game to the original that was like a downloadable title for the Xbox 360 and is also available on PC. That I would highly recommend. It's a very fun game. But beyond that, we don't really get a whole lot of time with Alice. I kind of hope that when Alan Wake 2 comes out, we maybe get the chance to spend some more time with Alice and get more of a sense for the depth of her character. I just think that'd be really neat. We also meet good old Pat Maine. Pat Maine might be one of my favorite characters in like the whole game. Dude's great. He is a local radio host. Let me just put that in there. Specifically for their night show. And one of the great things about like the game Alan Wake is Pat Maine is one of the characters you get the best sense for like his personality, because one of the collectibles in the game are his radio shows. As you go through each level, you can find radios, turn them on, and hear Pat Maine talking about current events, things that are going on, take calls from callers, and you get a sense for the kind of character he is. He's very much a romantic, you know? And some of my favorite, like, parts of the game are just, like, hearing him working, like, talking to, like, you know, people he knows in town. Like, hearing like there's people who need help, and he does his best to help them. He's also just like he seems like the kind of character who's just like, when this guy was younger, because he's an older gentleman. He seems like the kind of guy who, like, when this guy was younger, he was probably kind of a badass. Like, just based on, like, interactions that he has with characters later in the story. And yeah, I think he's one of those characters that just, like, his presence through the game is with the radio collectibles and everything is just constant. And like, you know, like I said, he's probably one of my favorite characters in the entire story, just based on that, because he's a neat guy. He's a neat character, and he's one of those just like kind of constant companions in a game where you're otherwise kind of entirely alone. Is that maybe a little bit parasocial? Possibly. Who fucking cares, though? On to the next. We got our mysterious weird dude. He's creepy. He's fucking weird. He's standing there. He's staring at Alice and Alan. Like, what the fuck, man? Stop it. It's weird. It's weird to stand there in your camo pants and just, like, look at people. Now, this guy, we'll learn his name later. In the game, you can actually go up to him, and he starts like, muttering, and he's just like, damn yuppies, you just wait, city boy. And it's just like, cool, bro. Thanks. I really appreciate the conversation. And then finally, we arrive in Bright Falls proper. Bright Falls as a town, you know, like I said, Alan Wake is one of those games where it's just like, you play it and you think, huh, that was cool, and then you go watch Twin Peaks and you go back and you play the game again and you're just like, oh, that's where all that comes from. Bright Falls is basically just like Twin Peaks, you know? It's this small town in Washington State with seemingly weird, a running undercurrent of weird shit happening in its history. And I mean, like, when I'm talking just like, oh, it's Twin Peaks, I'm talking like it's not even like a little subtle, you know? Like, even like fucking Twin Peaks has like the Bookhouse Boys, like this secret society that doesn't even really end up doing anything in the show. The fucking Bookhouse Boys are like the funniest fucking thing in Twin Peaks, because it's just like, cool, so what do you guys do? Oh, we protect the town from the dark forces of there's strange things in the forest. And then, like, anytime something fucking weird happens, they're all just like, well, that was fucking weird anyway. So, like, Silent Hill is another thing where it's just like, oh, this is just sort of like Twin Peaks. Although, to be fair, Silent Hill takes more inspiration from the works of Stephen King, you know, being set in New England and stuff like that. Silent Hill's in Maine. Did you know that? Not in West Virginia, and is not based on Centralia, Pennsylvania. Important. Silent Hill fans hate when people do that. You ever want to piss off Silent Hill fans, you wander into a forum and just like, hey guys, have you heard of Centralia, Pennsylvania? I heard that Silent Hill was based off of this. You'll get banned so quickly. No, I'm kidding. You probably won't get banned, but people will be like, shut the fuck up. It's specifically the movie version of Silent Hill that's based on Centralia, Pennsylvania. The games are based on like towns and the works of Stephen King. Which are mostly based in New England. Anyway. let's go ahead and continue forward and meet some more residents of this quaint little town. Chapter 2. Who am I supposed to get the key to the cabin from? Said Wake. A Mr. Carl Stuckey. Alice stopped at the traffic light, the only one that they had seen in town. He said that he was at the Oh Dear Diner every afternoon around about this time. Wake looked around as the car idled, waiting for the light to change. Nothing here but a dozen storefronts of dull, weathered brick, the whole downtown located on one street that ran along the water. Bright Falls was a tidy, small town with no... Jesus! Music scared me. With no litter, no graffiti, and no parking meters. On one side of the street, a hardware store touted deals on chainsaws and generators. On the other side, a shoe store announced a sale on steel-toed boots. A banner over the intersection declared, "Just 2 weeks until Deer Fest." "Welcome to Mayberry," he said. "Don't be such a snob," said Alice. "It's quaint. Very quaint." I don't get that reference. The fuck is... Hold on. Hold on. Mayberry? Some show from the 60s? Mayberry RFD, abbreviation for Rural Free Delivery, is an American television series produced as a spin-off continuation of The Andy Griffith Show. It ran for 3 seasons, 78 episodes between 1968 and 1971. I can only assume that's the reference being made here. Now me, I don't get that reference. I don't watch a lot of shows from the 60s. I mean, like, fuck, I only just started watching Columbo. Wake watched a dog amble across the street. Quaint means no Starbucks, no deli, no cable, and the film playing at the single-screen movie theater has been out on DVD in the real world for 6 months. Some people would find that a relief. Wake sighed. It's just hard for me to relax. Alice squeezed his hand. That's why we're here. You're right. Wake smiled in spite of himself. I'm an idiot. I don't know why you put up with me. Well, you do have your charms. Like that ass. She didn't say that. That was me making a joke. The light changed, but Alice ignored it. Wake watched her in the soft, late afternoon light. She was long and lean beside him, her movements languid and sensuous, as a cat stretching in the sunlight. Let's pick up the key, and I'll do my best to make it up to you. Alice glanced over at him. It's a deal, she said, starting through the intersection. A block later, she slowed and came to a stop in front of the Oh Dear Diner, leaving the engine running. You get the key from Stuckey, and I'll pick you up after I get some gas. They watched as a lone parade float drove slowly down the street, a heavy-duty logging truck decorated like a gigantic deer, antlers impossibly large. You're not just going to drive away and leave me here, are you? Teased Wake. It might do you some good, said Alice. Give you a taste of the simple life. Not without you. What kind of fun would that be? Alice pointed at the news rack beside the door, change glistening on the stack of newspapers. Look at that. The honor system. When was the last time you saw that in New York, Alan? Right around the time that the Dutch settlers swindled the Indians out of Manhattan. Wake kissed her and got out. Alan, I don't think anybody uses that word for Native Americans anymore. I'm gonna be honest. It's 2010, man. Come on. Get your shit together. Fucking weirdo. He watched as she drove down the street toward the single gas pump. Down the street. A little bit of redundancy. Probably should have been picked up in like a revision, but you know, I haven't published a fucking book, so who am I to talk? A smear of something pink lay melting on the sidewalk, surrounded by tiny black ants. Some kid must have dropped strawberry ice cream off his cone. Wake watched the line of ants streaming from under the diner to the smear, ravenous, more and more of them pouring out from the cracks to feed. He hurried into the diner, stopping just inside the doorway, feeling like a man who had just realized he was standing in the middle of a minefield. Not 2 feet away was a life-size cardboard stand-up of himself looking haunted and sensitive. A blow-up of the author photo that Alice had taken for his last novel, The Sudden Stop. Basic promotion, but in their condescending review of the book, the New York Times had found room to say it. While Wake's sleek good looks undoubtedly contribute to his massive sales, the current author photo, so redolent of the archetypal tortured artiste, signals an attempt to cross over into literary territory. What? Hold on. Let me fucking reread that. While Wake's sleek good looks undoubtedly contribute to his massive sales, the current author photo, so redolent of the archetypal tortured artiste, signals an attempt to cross over into literary territory? What? An attempt to cross over into literary territory? He's 6 books deep! That's a little bit more than crossing over! He's crossed! Yeah, thought Wake. Next photo shoot I'll wear a frilly dress and hockey mask so no one thinks I'm putting on airs. He stared at his frozen image and thought of the frantic book tour, the missed connecting flights and crowded bookstores, the gushing television and radio interviews. He remembered settling into the plush silence of a waiting limo after a long day, looking out at the world through thick smoked glass and wondering which side of the fishbowl he was on. Worse than all that, though, was the constant sense that the famous Alan Wake was a total fraud. Praise, the flattery, the first-class jets and 4-star hotels would all come to a crashing halt when the world realized that he hadn't been able to write a word since the sudden stop. He had spent months now staring at a blank sheet of paper in his typewriter. All he had to show for it was the title, Departure. It was just a matter of time until he ran out of excuses to his publisher, his agent, his wife, himself. What good was a writer who couldn't write? "Oh my God," a female voice said. Wake wanted to bolt out the door and chase Alice down, wanted to beg her to drive away, back to a city big enough that he could disappear in. "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," said a young woman coming out from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron, a pretty girl in a waitress uniform, with light brown hair and a face like an eager mouse. "This is so amazing. I almost didn't come into work today, if you can believe that. I would have just died if I had missed you." She pumped his hand like a desperate wildcatter. "I am your absolute biggest fan. Honest." Wake slowly disengaged his hand from her grip. "I didn't know there was a contest." "I've read all your books, Mr. Wake," she said. "Every one of them." "Thank you." "I'm Rose Marigold," said the girl, shaking his hand again. "I got the stand-up from your publisher. I put it up so I can see you all day while I work." "Nice to meet you, Rose," said Wake, looking around to see if anyone was watching the scene. They weren't. The only people in the diner was a park ranger in uniform at the counter and 2 white-haired old coots sitting in one of the back booths. One wall was covered with dusty trophy heads, deer, elk, antelope, but their dull glass eyes didn't see a thing. "Mr. Wake?" Rose peered at him. "I know at the end of the sudden stop you killed off Alex Casey, but he's not really dead, is he? I mean, not like forever dead. Alex Casey's my favorite character in the whole world." "That's very flattering," said Wake. "You're full of tricks, aren't you?" said Rose, grinning as she wagged a finger. "You can tell me. It's not like I'm going to post it on my blog. Unless you want me to, of course." I really have to," said Wake, backing away. "I'm supposed to meet someone here." "Who?" "A Mr. Carl Stuckey," said Wake. "He's got the key to the cabin my wife and I will be staying in." "You're staying in Bright Falls?" Rose fanned her flushed face. "This is the best day of my life." She turned to the deputy sitting at the counter. "Rusty, did you hear that?" "Yep, best day of your life, Rose." Park Ranger Rusty hoisted his coffee cup to Wake. "Best cup of coffee in town, too, sir." "Rusty, this is Alan Wake, the famous novelist," said Rose. "Mr. Wake, this here's Rusty. He's no longer human. Nothing but black coffee under a thin layer of skin." Rusty sipped from his cup, smacked his lips. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Mr. Wake." "Back at you," said Wake. "Do you know where I could find Carl Stuckey?" Rusty jerked a thumb towards the corridor in the back. "I believe he's using the facility." "Thanks," said Wake, staring towards the corridor. As he passed the 2 old men sitting in the booth, one of them pointed to the nearby jukebox. "How about some tunes, mister?" demanded one of the old men, clawing at his... Oh, wait, hold on. That was the wrong character. "How about some tunes, mister?" demanded one of the old men, clawing at his white beard. "Play B2, said the other one, a cheerful type with a black eye patch, his lone eye bright and blue as a sapphire. "Coconut!" His hair was as white as the other man's, and so was his beard. He had an adhesive name tag on his chest. Wait, hold on. Was it Tor saying that? Hold on. Coconut! His hair was as white as the other man's, and so was his beard. He had an adhesive name tag on his chest with Tor Anderson scrawled in red crayon. The other man had a similar tag with Odin Anderson on it. I'd play it myself, but my legs fell asleep. Coconut, said Tor. Again? You call yourself a rock and roller? You disgust me, you demented has-been. Don't worry about them, called Rusty. They wandered off from the Cauldron Lake Clinic, or lodge. Dr. Hartman will be by to pick them up any time now. Coconut, 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 chanted Odin, snapping his fingers. Shut up, shouted Tor. Just because we're brothers, don't think I won't strangle you in your sleep. Come on, mister, be a buddy, Odin pleaded with Wake. Be two. What's the matter, mister? You don't like music? Said Tor, his opposition to the song evidently forgotten now. I hope I'm not blowing out my mic too much making these voices. B2 will change your life, said Odin. Change your sheets, anyway, snarled Tor. 3 sheets to the wind, cackled Odin. God, we used to get drunk back in the day. Wake put a couple of quarters in the jukebox, punched B2. Hammered, agreed Tor, stroking his beard. Hammer of the gods. An elderly woman stood at the entrance to the dimly lit corridor, holding up a battery-powered lantern. Wake started around her. As Alice had said, Bright Falls was just a quaint little town, filled with senile lunatics. The woman squinted at Wake, her mouth a prim line. I wouldn't go in the corridor if I were you, young man. She clutched at him, tried to block his path. It's dark in there. Wake kept walking. The corridor was dark and shadowy, lit only by a flickering light in the far corner. Mr. Stucky? No answer. Mr. Stucky, called Wake, louder now. Twirls of flypaper hung from the ceiling, dotted with unwary insects. Probably could use a few ant traps, too. He pulled open the men's room door and stuck his head inside. No one there, just a damp towel beside the sink and a machine that dispensed squirts of cologne for 25 cents. He closed the door, turned around, and jerked. A woman stood there, right beside him. A woman in a black dress, wearing a pillbox hat, her face veiled. On her way to church for a funeral, or maybe just another one of the local crazies. Excuse me, said Wake, stepping back. I'm looking for a Carl Stucky. Carl couldn't make it. Through the veil, it looked like she was smiling. Poor man was taken sick. He was. Wake had a hard time looking at her. He felt disoriented, even through the veil her eyes were so dark that he felt like he was falling into them, losing himself. Carl was supposed to give me... I know what you need. Carl sent me to give you the key to the cabin, said the woman in black, her voice cracking as though she hadn't spoken in years. She handed him a key and a map drawn on a paper napkin. Her fingers brushing against him were cold. Thanks. I hope you enjoy your stay in my cabin, said the woman in black. I'll come by later to see how you've settled in. I'm looking forward to meeting that wife of yours. That won't be necessary. No bother, said the woman in black. I insist. Wake didn't intend to argue the point. Her laugh echoing in his ears, he started back down the corridor, back into the light of the diner. He turned around, but the lady in black was gone. He was glad that she wasn't watching him behind that veil anymore, but it was almost as though she had disappeared. Oh, give me 1 second. I gotta make a gross noise. Okay. The lady he had seen earlier raised the lamp high as he passed her. You're a lucky man. That's me, said Wake. You got lucky this time, called the lady of the lamp. You can hurt yourself in the dark. Wake looked into the dead eyes of the trophy heads as he wandered toward the front of the diner. One elk had a piece of its antler broke off, and someone had stuck a cigarette into the mouth of one of the deer. The jukebox was playing the coconut song while one of the old coots, Tor, bounced and bobbed along to the music. The other one, Odin, rested his head on the table of the booth. Odin jerked slightly as Wake passed, then grabbed for him. Tommy, hey, you wouldn't happen to have a bottle on you, would you? He said, speech slurred. Tommy, you get back here and pour me a drink. Me too, mumbled Tor. He pounded a fist on the table.
Barkeep, set him up for me and my baby brother. Can't see what's in front of your nose without a few drinks, said Odin.
Easy, boys, chided Rusty. Save it for Dr. Hartman. Can I get you a cup of coffee, Mr. Wake? Called Rose. On the house. No thanks, said Wake, heading for the door. His cardboard stand-up seemed to watch him as he approached. Wake was tempted to draw glasses and a handlebar mustache on the damned thing. Making a big mistake, Mr. Wake, said Rusty, slurping his coffee. Rose here serves only 100% pure Colombian. Wake stepped outside and immediately felt better. A cool breeze rolled off the water and he just stood there for a few minutes catching his breath. Alice pulled up in the car, giving him a happy beep of the horn. Wake quickly got in. You got the key? Said Alice. Wake nodded. Everything okay? Just happy to see you. Okay. So we continue our run through the various characters of Bright Falls. We've met a few now at this point. First and foremost, I believe we've met Rose Marigold. Rose is an Alan Wake superfan. She mentions that she has a blog, which I believe is established in the game as well. But I'm talking, when we say that she's a superfan, I'm talking like full on, she's going on forums, she's arguing with people about stuff, and just like, hey, it's just like, what, you call Alan Wake stupid? He's not stupid, you're stupid. She is like going to bat for this guy constantly. And Alan hates this. It's established in the game as part of, I want to say, like, Alan's internal monologue that he hates overeager fans. They always exhaust him. Consistently. So the fact that, like, the very first building that he walks into is like staffed by a super fan with a goddamn cardboard cutout standing at the front door, mortifying. Super fan with a vlog sounds like Screwball. Now the Oh Dear Diner is obviously a kind of a stand-in, like, if we're going with, like, the Twin Peaks references, the Oh Dear Diner is the R&R. The Double R Diner from Twin Peaks. Which would make Rose basically Shelley Johnson, more or less. Although, I don't think Shelley Johnson was ever this manic in personality. We have also met Rusty. Park Ranger. He is the park ranger for the nearby Elder. Wait, Elderwood is Twin Peaks. I'm getting these mixed up now. No, Twin Peaks is Ghostwood. Elderwood National Forest is what it's called in Alan Wake. I'm pretty sure. Oh God. You know, I started making Twin Peaks comparisons because the game calls for it. It is Elderwood National Park. So he's the park ranger for Elderwood National Park. But he's out here downtown getting some coffee from the Oh Dear Diner because he really fucking likes the coffee. And I'm going to go ahead and put this line down for no particular reason. Definitely not for foreshadowing purposes. No, sir. Don't know why you would think that. That would be crazy. And of course, we're also introduced to the Anderson brothers, Odin and Thor. Former rock stars with the band The Old Gods of Asgard. That's what it's called. Children of the Elder Gods is the song. Old Gods of Asgard is the band. Okay, calm down. I'm trying to... Let's give the music a moment. I like Old Gods of Asgard too. I don't know if it necessitates the triumphant swell, but this... Okay. Now obviously they have styled themselves after their namesake. One of them wearing an eye patch, calling himself Odin. One talking about hammers and getting hammered, calling himself Thor, which I believe is an acceptable spelling, alternate spelling of Thor. It's mentioned that they are staying up at Cauldron Lake Lodge, which is very quickly corrected from Cauldron Lake Clinic by Rusty. It is a clinic. We'll get into some of the details of the clinic as we go along. It is an important spot in the story, which will become very important later on. We've also met the Lamp Lady. Anything that takes heavy inspiration from Twin Peaks has to have the weird woman carrying some random object. In Deadly Premonition, that was the Soup Lady. In its original context, it was the Log Lady. And here in Alan Wake, we have the Lamp Lady, who seems very, very concerned that people not go into the dark, and is very concerned about the state of the light bulbs in basically all of Bright Falls. We've got a mysterious woman in black who hands Wake the key and map to her cabin, which is supposedly the one that he is supposed to be staying in, quote unquote, supposedly. After saying that, unfortunately, Carl just couldn't make it. He's taken ill. Unfortunately. Oh, God. Woo! Excuse me. Unfortunately, he's taken ill and cannot make it. So anyways, here's the key and the map. I'm definitely not an evil spirit. For sure. Don't know why you would think that. That'd be weird. Wouldn't that be weird if that was true? That'd be super fucking weird. But we also have sort of the unseen character. Discussed, but not present, is Carl Stuckey. Now, Carl's going to become a little bit more important when we get a little bit further into the story. But right now, his most important aspect is that he wasn't there. Except that in the game, he absolutely was. Because after Wake gets the key and the map from the Lady in Black, and he drives off with Alice, he comes stumbling out of the diner with the actual key to their cabin. But that's not the last time that Stuckey's going to come up. Like I said, we'll be seeing him again. Maybe not all of him, but he'll be there. Does the Lamp Lady like bugs by any chance? It's not established. She likes lamps and light bulbs. And light. Don't know about bugs, though. Couldn't tell you. I think in her backstory, she's established as like the former editor of the newspaper. like the local rag, which doesn't get a whole lot of play in the game itself in terms of like discussion with regards to it. But if you watch the live action miniseries, or the live action series of minisodes, Bright Falls, the newspaper comes up much more prominently. And there's even a character from the games that doesn't actually show up physically in the games, that shows up physically in that little miniseries. It's really neat, honestly. If you ever get a chance to check out Bright Falls, I highly recommend it. It's fantastic. Anyways, let's move on, shall we? Chapter 3. I'm going to flip ahead real quick. There's something I wanted to check. Ah, okay. Chapter 3. You sure about this? Said Wake, trailing her as they pressed deeper into the forest, trees soaring above them. He was committed now, his shoes filthy, his pants rasped by thorns. 10 miles out of town, Alice suddenly pulled over, parked the car on the shoulder of the road, and started into the woods with barely any explanation. None that made sense, at any least. Alice, this thing you think you saw, you're sure it's not just a mirage or something? I know what I saw, said Alice, striding through a spiderweb shimmering with moisture, the web like a strand of pearls falling to the forest floor. She kept walking, a leaf caught in her hair, cheeks flushed, nature girl in jeans and a light jacket. She turned, evidently sensing his gaze. What? You look beautiful, that's all, said Wake. Nobody would guess you've perfected the two-finger whistle that brings cabs screeching to the curb. I wasn't always a New Yorker, said Alice, tramping across a carpet of stunted berries. She peered through the thick underbrush. I think I see it up ahead. I gotta move this. I got the Xbox controller sitting in front of me, and it's fucking with my hand placement. Okay. Wake led the way in the direction she had pointed, hurrying now, not because he was so eager to see what she alone was convinced was there, it was ridiculous after all, but because it was getting dark and he wanted to get to the cabin before the sun went down. Alice blew right past him, head low to avoid a thick cedar bow. Yes, I was right! Wake stared, shaking his head, stunned. In the middle of a small clearing stood a wrecked car. A mid-'80s Ford convertible, windshield cracked, and its ragtop mildewed and tattered. The undercarriage must have split because a fir sapling grew up from the center, right through the shredded top like a small green umbrella. That is weird. You think? Said Alice, slowly circling the car as she snapped photographs. There must be an explanation. Wake ran a fingertip across one of the side panels. It came up mossy. Well, it wasn't driven here, said Alice. It's surrounded by trees that have been here long before it was built. Might have been a prank, said Wake. High school kids disassembled it and put it back together in here. Alice opened the driver's side door, hinges creaking. Only 11,000 miles on the odometer. If it was a prank, somebody would have wanted it back. No way it was just abandoned. Wake checked the back seat. He kicked one of the flattened tires, bent down and examined it, then stood up. Alice, this car, I think it was dropped here. She gingerly touched the branches on the side of the small fir tree sprouting in the car. I thought the tires had rotted from time and weather, but they didn't rot, they burst. Wake pointed at the long tear in the sidewall of the tire. Burst upon impact. That's only going to happen if the car was dropped from a great height. He ran a hand through his hair. Do they have tornadoes around here? Not in the Pacific Northwest, said Alice. At least I never heard of one. Tiny yellow mushrooms sprouted on the leather seats. Mold had reduced the upholstery to mush. Maybe it fell from an airplane. Maybe it was being transported? It's still in gear, said Wake. Keys still in the ignition? This car was being driven at the time. The wind stirred in the trees and he shivered. We should head back. How did the car get here, Alan? Wake shook his head. Aren't you curious? The trees rustled, louder now, the shadows in the woods lengthening. Alice seemed to know the growing darkness for the first time. We should go. Wake took her hand, led her back toward the road. Tomorrow we could drive back to town and ask around. Alice walked ahead of him now, hurrying. Wake glanced back at the car, already swallowed up by the forest. You know what else is weird? Alice glanced back, but kept walking. If it was a tornado, or something like that, what happened to the driver? Alice stopped. Somebody was driving the car when it landed in the woods. Wake spread his hands. So, what happened to the driver? Maybe he walked away from the fall. Then why didn't he retrieve the car? I don't know. We should go, said Alice, turning away from him, practically running through the underbrush now. Neither of them spoke again until they were back in their car, Alice grinding the ignition in her haste to get it started. We'll go into town first thing tomorrow, said Wake. We'll ask around. I should have taken more photographs, said Alice, the car roaring into life. We can come back tomorrow. Wake's comment was cut off as Alice peeled out from the dirt shoulder and onto the blacktop. "15 minutes later, driving into the sunset, the fright in the woods seemed long ago and far away. The abandoned car a mere anomaly, a spooky story to be shared with friends amidst laughter and drinks. Maybe turn it into a book when the writer's block finally lifted. Short story, anyway. The Mystery of the Marooned Convertible. Maybe it was a UFO, said Wake, straight-faced. Aliens beamed up the convertible, kept the driver for their intergalactic zoo, and tossed back the car. Or maybe it was a group of medieval enthusiasts launched the car into the woods with a catapult, said Alice, then reported the car stolen and used the insurance money for suits of armor and siege engines. That's gotta be it, said Wake. What other explanation could there be? Alice smiled and kept driving, window down, her hair floating on the breeze. Wow, she said, pointing as the lake came into view. That's what we came here for. Cauldron Lake stretched out for miles, surrounded by steep cliffs and tall trees. The lake was so vast and deep, so blue that it was almost black. No fish broke the flat, opaque surface, no gulls drifted overhead. It's a caldera, she said. That's where they got the name. A volcanic eruption thousands of years ago collapsed the Earth's crust into a gigantic bowl that eventually filled with water. Thanks for the tourist board version, teased Wake. Looks like a witch's cauldron to me. Thanks for the melodrama, she sought back, slowing now. She nodded at the cabin below. Is that it? Wake checked the crude map that the woman at the diner had given him. Yeah, that's it. I'm actually going to be right back. My mouth's getting a little dry. I need a drink. One moment, everybody. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Let me go ahead and crack this open. Alright. So where were we? Oh, right. They had just arrived at Cauldron Lake. Cauldron Lake. Hey, everybody. It's Cauldron Lake. Okay. Alice drove down a gravel road and parked, turned off the ignition. The two of them got out, stood looking at the cabin, which was built on a tiny island just offshore, connected to the mainland by a staircase and a rickety wooden bridge. The cabin was unnerving somehow. Not from its raw, unadorned construction, but because the foundation was made up of twisting branches and roots jutting out from the bottom like legs of a monstrous bird. As though seeking to acknowledge any squeamishness visitors might have, a hand-carved sign over the last bridge announced Bird Leg Cabin. "Is this what you expected?" said Wake. "Not really. The brochure said that the cabin was near the lake," said Alice. "Not on an island. Not that I'm complaining. It's creepy. It's gorgeous," said said Alice. "Our own private island." They walked down the weathered wooden staircase, stopping on the slatted bridge that led to the island. Alice stood there, hands on her hips, the bridge swaying under them. The wind colder. She pushed her sunglasses back onto the top of her head, taking it all in. The cabin was a small, two-story structure made of raw wood shakes, with a wraparound porch, and a pile of cut logs next to the door for firewood. A radio rested on the porch railing. If it wasn't for the grotesque nest of raw branches it sat on, it would have been perfect. "Interesting architectural decision," said Alice. "It looks like Frank Lloyd Wright went nuts with a box of pickup sticks," said Wake. "Not exactly the perfect place to stay for a man with an overactive imagination." "I think it's distinctive," said Alice, pulling out her camera. "That's one word for it." Wake's phone rang. "Yeah?" "Hey, Al, how's my favorite bestseller doing?" said Barry. As always, he sounded out of breath, talking in staccato bursts. "Fine, Barry." Alice rolled her eyes at the mention of Barry's name. She couldn't stand his agent. Didn't like his thick New York accent, his incessant name-dropping and pushy bluster, his loud sport coats. Barry was an agent. She might as well not have liked a leopard because of his spots. He was also Wake's oldest friend. "You there yet?" said Barry. "Plane didn't crash?" Wake stared at the phone. "No, Barry, the plane didn't crash. I haven't had a heart attack and the world hasn't exploded." "Don't be so touchy," said Barry, sounding genuinely wounded, which must have taken years of practice. "I'm just worried about you, Al. Want to make sure nobody's messing with my superstar." "I'm fine. I'm totally behind this little vacation of yours, Al. Totally. Just get away with the little woman and recharge the creative juices. What's so funny?" "Nothing," said Wake. "We're just settling in, so..." "I get it," said Barry. "Listen, I'll call you back later and see how you're doing." "No need for that," said Wake. "Hey," said Barry. "I don't look after you because I have to. I do it because I want to." "I love you too," said Wake, breaking the connection. "Couldn't you block his number while we're here?" said Alice, on one knee to get a close-up of the tangled branches the cabin seemed to rest upon, some of them no thicker than twigs. "He called you the little woman." Alice stood up. "You can't be serious." Wake shrugged. "The man likes to live dangerously." "So do you." Alice kissed him. "No more talk about Barry. Just get the lights on, handsome. It's getting dark." Wake took the small flashlight out of his jacket and handed it to her. "There's an electrical line running from the cabin to that shack in the back. There must be a generator in there. I'll get it up and running before it gets dark. Don't worry." "You take care of it, and I'll check out the cabin," said Alice. Wake went behind the cabin, walking towards the shack. A big stump off to one side of the path had a heart carved deeply into the bark. TZ and BJ. Oh, no, I'm kidding. He'd have to show it to Alice later. She'd like that, think the cabin had a romantic history. Couldn't hurt. He knocked the stump for good luck, then knocked on the stump for good luck, then traipsed over and opened the door to the shack. A generator covered with a sheen of dust filled half the space. He checked to make sure it was topped up with gasoline, primed it, and tugged on the start cord. It started immediately. Just as quickly died. He repeated the process. Again. Again. The thing must not have been started in a long time. He kept jerking on the cord, aware that the sky was rapidly darkening. On the 20th try, the generator started up. He adjusted the throttle, made sure it was humming along, and went back to the cabin. The front door opened smoothly. Even though it was barely dusk, Alice had every light in the place on. Alice wasn't afraid of crowds, or rats, or the boogeyman. She once found a tarantula in their hotel room in Phoenix and released it unheard outside. She drove fast, flew without fear, and slept through thunderstorms as long as the lights stayed on. Darkness was the only thing she was scared of, and it utterly terrified her. She had all kinds of therapy without success, accepting it as part of who she was. She had gotten used to carrying a pocket flashlight he had gotten used to carrying a pocket flashlight with him, just in case the one she carried with her failed for any reason. It was a small price to pay. He listened again to make sure the generator was running smoothly and went inside the cabin. The kitchen had all of the amenities: coffee maker, refrigerator, gas stove, blender, and a toaster. The living room had a braided carpet over the wood floor, a rocking chair, and a sofa facing a large stone fireplace. A grandfather clock ticked away in one corner. A bookcase contained old paperbacks and a stack of board games. He walked over to check out the books. Most of them were by Thomas Zane, an author he'd never heard of. Thomas Zane. The TZ from the Carved Heart? He made a note to ask around town, find out who BJ was and what had happened to the two of them. Everyone loved a mystery, and Wake loved them more than most. Imagine Wake walking up to somebody in town and just being like, hey, what can you tell me about BJ? Just getting smacked across the face. And then maybe like one person's into it. He's just like, wait, no, it's not what I mean. The sun setting over the lake turned the surface to beaten gold. Wake walked down to the back deck, rested his hands on the railing, and watched the day slowly die. He and Alice could be happy here. He might even get some sleep in the stillness. There wasn't a ripple on the lake, not a fish jumping, just a perfectly flat surface stretching out to the horizon. He stayed there, enjoying the view, watching the lake turn from gold to black as the light faded. He switched on the portable radio that rested on the table, immediately hearing a familiar voice. Pat Main here, telling you it's going to be a clear night, so you folks from the big city might want to look up once in a while and check out the stars. Wake winced. I just ran into a famous artist on the ferry, said Maine. Let's see if any of you can guess who it was. Here's our first caller. Hello, Rose. I know who it is, said Rose, sounding giddy. I just saw him at the diner. It's Alan Wake, the famous novelist. Wake switched off the radio. So much for keeping a low profile. Come on up, Alan, called Alice from upstairs. I have a surprise for you. Wake took the stairs two at a time. This man... he's got one thing on his mind, and it's his wife. He found her in the bedroom, half-dressed, her black jeans folded over the back of an overstuffed chair. The windows to the small balcony were open, and he could hear the lake lapping at the island. He slipped his arms around her, cheek to cheek, felt her smooth, warm skin under his fingers. I'm not the surprise, whispered Alice. You're always the surprise, said Wake, still clinging to her. That's why I love you. Through the window, he could see that it was dark outside, stars scattered across the sky. More stars than either of them had seen in years. More stars than anyone could ever wish upon. He held her tighter. I'm glad we came here. The surprise is in the study, said Alice, slowly separating from him. I'll show you. Wake followed her, enjoying the slight bounce of her hips as she walked. She took his hand, led him into the study. A desk sat under two porthole windows overlooking the lake. He could see stars reflected in the dark surface of the lake. It made him dizzy for a moment, as though the lake was deep as the sky was high. Well, what do you think? Said Alice. Wake stared at the black manual typewriter on the desk. What's my typewriter doing here? I brought it, said Alice. I know you brought it, said Wake. I'm asking why you brought it. Why are you so angry? I'm not angry, said Wake. I thought you might want to write here, said Alice. It's peaceful, no pressure. I thought a change of scenery might... Do you actually think the reason I can't write is because I need a change of scenery? Said Alan. You don't need to raise your voice, Alan. I'm not raising my voice. I'm just trying to help. If you want to help, don't help. Alice didn't back down. Anyone else would have apologized, made some excuse, afraid of the famous Alan Wake temper. Not Alice. You don't eat, you barely sleep, and you're angry all the time because you can't write, said Alice, her eyes steady and concerned. It's not just your problem, Alan. It's our problem. She took his hand. I love you. I want you back doing what you love. I want you writing again. She should have stopped there, but she didn't. If she had kissed him, led him back to the bedroom, there was no telling what might have happened. She didn't do that, though. She didn't do that, though. There's a doctor in Bright Falls. He has a clinic where he treats people like you, creative people who can't work. I've read his book, and he makes so much sense, Alan. His name is Dr. Hartman. Hartman? Wake stepped away from her, anger boiling inside him. I met a couple of the good doctor's patients at the diner. You think I need to be committed? No, darling, of course not, said Alice, reaching for him. Dr. Hartman treats artists. Wake pushed her aside. Play B2, the coconut song will change your life. What? That's not my what. That's Alice's what. She says what in response to that because that's the what the fuck? That's the silliest thing that you could have said in this situation. Congratulations. I don't need a typewriter. I don't need any more pressure, and I definitely don't need a shrink. Wake stalked down the stairs. Alan, don't go. Wake grabbed the flashlight off the kitchen counter, started out the door, but the door was stuck. He had to... Mitty, did you just knock some... Mitty, you knocked the case for Alan Wake Remastered off my computer. Calamity! Anyway. Using the flashlight, walked out onto the bridge... Or, hold on, no. The door was stuck. He had to throw his shoulder against it to force it open. Alan! Wake walked out onto the bridge, using the flashlight to guide him. He walked along the shore, watching the stars until his anger cooled. It didn't take long. He couldn't stay mad at Alice. She had been trying to help him. He had been an idiot, a prima donna. He started back to the cabin, rehearsing his apology. Alan! Alice's panic cut through the night. Alan, where are you? The lights in the cabin were dark. The generator must have stopped. Wake raced back along the bridge toward the stairs. Almost fell in his haste. No! Get back! I'm coming, shouted Wake, pounding across the bridge. Come! No! Get away from me! Wake drove the front door open, ran up the stairs. As he reached the landing where there was the sound of rotting wood giving way. He heard Alice scream again and then the splash of something hitting the water. She wasn't in the bedroom. Alice? Where are you? He ran down the stairs and out onto the back deck. Part of the wooden railing had been snapped off. Alice! There was no sound other than his own echo. He peered down as he played the flashlight beam across the black water. Thought he saw something. Alice? The shape was sinking now, almost out of sight, whatever it was. Alice! Wake dove in after her. Very, very appropriate, mysterious musical sting. So that was chapter 4. So, again, mostly covers the events of the game, more or less. With a notable exception. Ugh, God, excuse me. Hiccuping. Excuse me. Okay. So this scene with Alice and Alan finding a wrecked car that appears to have been dropped from the sky in the middle of an old-growth forest is not in the game. Basically, once they get the key from the woman in black, the game transitions pretty much immediately to them getting to the cabin. Now, that being said, this kind of scene is not... Okay, calm down. This kind of scene is not altogether non-present, unpresent. It's there in the book. There's all sorts of moments, or it's there in the game. There's moments in the game where you find things in places that realistically they shouldn't be. I want to say like the earliest that you find something like that, I think is in chapter 2 when you're exploring Elderwood. But this specific one isn't there, but it does introduce this idea of, hey, weird old shit is apparently just falling from the fucking sky in Bright Falls. Isn't that fucking weird? I think that's pretty fucking weird. And we'll get an answer as to exactly what's kind of going on with that as we get further in. But right now, like, it's a neat way to kind of introduce this mystery really early on, in such a way that it's just like you kind of get the sense of like some of these characters where like Alice is always kind of keeping an eye out for like what makes a good shot, something that is like artistically like aesthetically and artistically pleasing, something like this old 80s convertible with a tree growing up out of it, right? Her pulling off to the side of the road when they really need to get to the cabin before it gets dark is maybe a little impulsive of her, but, you know, so is some other stuff that she does later on, you know, doing something without necessarily thinking about the consequences of what she's doing all the way through before, like, she does it, but we'll get to that. We also get a bit of Alan's skeptic nature. Alan is, of course, a huge skeptic within the story of the Alan Wake games. And it gets brought up a lot later on in the game, like specifically called out a lot later on. Again, I think in like chapter 2 when you get to Elderwood. But this is also a really good way to introduce it as well, with Alan mockingly suggesting, oh, maybe UFOs did it. So, let me see. So this particular scene gives us a little bit more with regards to the characters. We also get sort of like Alan trying to like puzzle out just like, hey, isn't it actually really fucking weird that this is here, with him like noticing little details about it and realizing like, hey, this doesn't make any fucking sense. What's going on here, and becoming very curious about it. Not really like this is the thing. Once he starts noticing those little details, he stops like really he briefly stops being interested in leaving anymore. Like suddenly like, wait, no, this is actually super interesting. I kind of want to explore this concept. Which I think is really important to think about as like a character trait of his for like later on, where it's just like when his mind is suddenly set on something, when something grabs his curiosity, his attention, he's not going to let go of it. And then of course, like I said, bringing up his skeptical nature, him mockingly bringing up the idea of like a UFO dropping in the middle of the forest. Prior to that, trying to figure out like, hey, how could this have happened? Or just like, hey, did they get tornadoes here? And then Alice bring up, oh, maybe it dropped off from a plane. And he said, it's still in gear. Someone was driving this, blah, 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 blah. So this is a really good sort of like microcosm to show like these characters' personalities this early in the story. Especially for Alice, a character who really doesn't get a whole lot of opportunity to sort of like blossom, I guess, as a character, given how she kind of takes a back seat to most of the events of the game when she gets fucking kidnapped. Which she does at the end of this chapter, but we'll get to that in a second. So then we reach Birdleg Cabin. Hold on. Fucking... Now, Birdleg Cabin in the game is named as such. So there's a couple names to kind of like keep in mind around all of this. First off, Cauldron Lake. This is the name of the actual like lake itself. It's formed from the eruption of a volcano. This is the Pacific Northwest. We're talking like eruption like Mount St. Helens kind of thing, that sort of deal. From there's Diver's Isle. Diver's Isle is the name of the actual island in Cauldron Lake. And then on Diver's Isle is Bird Leg Cabin. Bird Leg Cabin is named Bird Leg Cabin because Diver's Isle looks like a bird leg. If you're lost, don't worry. It's not too important. But something that is important to bring up is that they mentioned that the massive like twigs and shit that like in the book, the reason for the name Bird Leg Cabin is because the like mass of like twigs and branches that it sits upon as a foundation looks like it's sitting on two massive bird legs. This is actually from an earlier version of the story where effectively this was the Baba Yaga hut, more or less. Which is another sort of like inspiration for the story that we're going to get into a little bit later, specifically regarding some characters we are now getting hints of. It should also be noted that in the game, Bird Leg Cabin from One Direction kind of looks like a bird with like the roof and the chimney kind of forming like the point of the beak. The porthole windows mentioned in the room in the study that Alice sets the typewriter up in looking like the eyes, and the back and front porch and like the veranda going over them looking like wings. So a lot of imagery going on here. Now, as Alan is walking around and exploring the cabin and exploring the backyard, we get some implications of some other potential characters here. We get TZ and BJ, right? TZ, we get an answer for who that is pretty quickly. While inside Bird Leg Cabin, Alan finds a number of books by an author named Thomas Zane, who he admits is an author he's never heard of before. These books are also something that you can find in the game, though in the game specifically they're found in a shoebox, which is important for later on. We'll get to it. BJ, or Blowjob... No. BJ is a character we don't really have a whole lot of information on just yet. I won't get into too much detail about them. Suffice to say, it seems like they had some kind of a thing going on with old TZ over here, with old Thomas Zane. So, eventually, Alice goes ahead and is just like, hey, Alan, I brought your typewriter with us so that you could write. And Alan gets so mad. He gets so angry, like, goddamn. And then, this is what I was talking about before, where, like, part of Alice's personality is that she kind of, like, stands up to Alan in a sense. Like, it's mentioned in the narration where it's just like anybody else at the point that Alan has got to with how angry he is would back down and apologize, but Alice is just like, hey, wait, no, you chill out. Until at least she unfortunately mentions Dr. Hartman. Now, you know, it's not necessarily Alice's fault. She couldn't have known that Alan would have met a couple patients of Dr. Hartman in the diner. And in fact, it's actually dawning on me right now reading this, because this is my second time reading this book. And I've played this game several times. It's actually dawning on me right now that part of the reason that Alan gets so upset about that is because he knew about Dr. Hartman specifically with regards to the crazy old dudes that he met in the diner. And it's just like, oh, him being like, so now you want to have me committed makes sense. Because before, like, her just being like, oh, he runs a clinic could have meant anything. But now that he knows that, like, oh, he runs a clinic and he has the context of, like, oh, the place the two crazy old guys go to, now he's like, oh, so now you want to have me fucking committed. Like, I never put that together until now. That's interesting. See, this is why replaying and rereading stories can be important. You miss things. You miss little details like that. You dig? Was that chapter 3? I thought that was chapter 4. Is this chapter? Hold on. Okay, yeah, alright. Wake storms out. Here's Alice screaming because all the lights have gone off. Heads on in. Here's her screaming for somebody to stay away. Here's Wood breaking. Thinks he spots her in the lake and dives in after her. And that's where our chapter ends. Okay. I think I got maybe one more in me for today. Well, we'll see how long it takes us to get through chapter 4. Chapter 4. Wake sank into Cauldron Lake, drifting deeper into the dark water as he searched for Alice, lost in the silence, weighted down with it. He glimpsed someone below. A deeper darkness struggled to reach her, the silence broken now, interrupted by the clack of a typewriter, his typewriter, the old manual Remington with the sticking J key. He'd recognize it anywhere, even in the darkness, especially in the darkness. He struggled, the water thickening around him as he looked for Alice. He could no longer tell up from down, as lost as she was now. There was something up ahead. A light? No, more of a glimmer in the water, a shining. He heard a voice, Alice's voice, over the clacking typewriter. Alan, wake up. Wake struggled to reach the light, tearing at the dark water. The light was suddenly brighter, and Wake saw a man in a deep-sea diving suit standing in the middle of the road. A man caught in the headlights, blinking in the glare. The diver lifted one hand. Alan! Screamed Alice. Wake awoke from the nightmare, gasping, out of breath, feeling like his lungs were filled with sand. He sat in the driver's seat of their car, dazed, his forehead throbbing from where he hit his head on the steering wheel. The airbag hadn't deployed. Call Barry and tell him to get a lawyer. Sue somebody. Not funny. Snap out of it, Wake. His mouth tasted of blood. No Alice. He called her name, the sound croaking out of his dry lips. Alice! He called again as he pushed open the door. Staggering out, the sound of glass from the broken window tinkling onto the blacktop like shards from his heart. He looked around, trying to get his bearings. An illuminated sign for Stucky's gas station loomed in the roadway above, the cone of light reaching down around him. He was on a rocky ledge. Their car had crashed the guardrail of the winding mountain road and gone over the edge, stopped only by a tree on the ledge below. Lucky thing, too, otherwise it would have been plunged straight down the mountain. Even now, the car hovered on the brink, the tree splintering, steam escaping from the radiator, and he didn't feel lucky. Steam escaped from the radiator, and he didn't feel lucky. Stars sparkled through the steam, stars stretching across the sky, and as far as they reached, they couldn't find Alice either. He pulled out his cell phone. Nothing. He shook it. The battery was dead. He resisted the impulse to smash it to pieces on the rocks, from one nightmare to another and no end in sight. Wake rubbed his eyes, but it was hard to focus, like trying to see underwater. And for a moment he had to fight not to fall back into the dream of being lost at the lake searching for Alice. He dimly remembered the cabin on the island, Bird Lake cabin, squatting in a nest of sharp branches, the image fading now until he wasn't sure if that had been a dream too. Wake balled his fists, rejected the idea. No. He didn't know how he had gotten here, had no memory of the drive or of the crash. All he knew, all that he was utterly aware of, was that something had happened to Alice. Something terrible. Wake walked around the crashed car. The cliff back to the road was too steep to climb up. It might be hours before another car came along, and no guarantee that the driver would notice the broken guardrail. The car's trunk had sprung from the impact. Their suitcases popped open from the impact of the crash. Wake bent down on one knee, touched Alice's clothing, her sweater, her favorite pink silk blouse. He held the blouse for a few moments, fingering the delicate fabric, then folded her clothes as best he could before replacing them in the bag. Wake picked up a hardback book from the suitcase. The Creator's Dilemma by a Dr. Emil Hartman. He had never seen it before, but the blurb on the back cover said Hartman specialized in helping artists with creative problems at his clinic. Sure you do, Doc. He remembered the fight with Alice in the cabin after she told him about making an appointment for him to meet with Hartman. His cheeks flushed with the memory, seeing the concern in her face. Alice worrying about his insomnia, his sudden rages. He shouldn't have jumped all over her for just trying to help. He was an idiot, a thin-skinned idiot. If he had just nodded, said thanks but no thanks, he wouldn't have stormed out, and Alice might still be with him. Instead, he was here, stuck on the side of a mountain, the car wrecked and Alice missing. Wake pawed through the rest of their things, smelling Alice's perfume on her clothes. He slowly picked up a small framed photo of the two of them on vacation 3 years ago. They were lying on a white sand beach in Malta, holding up umbrella drinks for the camera, both of them tanned and happy in the sun. Wake hadn't wanted to go, but Alice had ignored his excuses and made the arrangements. He was glad she had. It had been a good time, his books doing well, the writing coming easily, no fights, no arguments, just the two of them, happy and together. He carefully tucked the photo onto his jacket, slung the suitcase into the trunk, made his chest hurt thinking about those days in the sun. Get moving, Wake. Impossible to climb back up to the road, the narrow path down the mountain led into the dark forest, but there was no other way to reach Stucky's gas station. That was his best bet for finding help. It would be a long hike, but they'd have a phone he could use at least. Wake tore off a nearby blank page from Hartman's book, scrawled a note in case someone came by. Wife missing. Gone through the woods to gas station for help. Alan Wake. He tucked the note under one of the windshield wipers, jumped back as the tree supporting the car groaned, cracked, and gave way. The tree, and then the car, fell down the cliff. Wake jumped back and watched the car tumbling end over end in a shower of sparks as it bounced off the rocks. He felt oddly detached somehow, as though viewing a movie of a car crashing rather than seeing one, hearing one. He shook his head. He wished that he could wake up alongside Alice and have everything be fine, but that wasn't going to happen. Not yet. Not until he found her. He started down the rugged path. Almost slipped and barely caught himself. As he entered the forest, he got one last glimpse of the gas station, and then it was lost to the darkness. A raven cawed somewhere up ahead, and its cry was answered by others, an unkindness of ravens on all sides. Wake kept moving, sticking to the main trail, hoping that would lead him to the gas station. He could barely see at first, but after a few minutes his eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the trees. The woods smelled of pine and cedar, and the damp smell of rotting vegetation. The trail dipped and twisted, split into 3 forks, and he stopped, heart pounding so loudly he couldn't separate it from the sound of crickets, which started up again, louder now, rising and falling. He couldn't tell if the sound was outside or inside his own head. He looked around as though the sound came from someplace other than his thoughts. He rubbed the spot on his forehead where he had banged his head in the crash, the wound still leaking. That must be a good sign, probably right there in the first aid section of the Boy Scout manual. When experiencing a traumatic head injury, take comfort if it keeps oozing blood, because that means you're not losing your mind after misplacing your wife. No merit badge for you, Wake. The woods whispered around him, leaves brushing against each other, and the sound was like insects rising from the earth. Sheets of beetles, just shiny and hard. He checked his watch. It felt like he had only just entered the forest, but over an hour had passed since he left the crash site. He wondered how long he had been standing there, unsure of how to proceed. Wake took the right-hand path, afraid that if he didn't start moving, he would still be in this exact same spot when the sun came up. He started trotting, but quickly faded as the path started uphill. Better to save his strength and keep up a brisk walk. No telling how long it would take him to get there. A raven shrieked, startling him. Wake slipped on loose gravel, banged his knee. Cursing, he limped forward. A bright light flared from behind a rocky outcropping up ahead. Wake called out, rubbing his knee as he approached. The light seemed to flicker. Anybody there? Wake approached cautiously. Hello? The light died. Wake stepped past the outcropping of rock. 2 sheets of white paper fluttered to the ground, gleaming, and Wake thought of angel's wings. He rubbed his head again, disoriented. The paper's glow fading as they settled into the weeds. Paper didn't fall from the sky, except when the Air Force wanted to alert the civilian population to an imminent bombing attack. Evacuate the city! Your lives are in danger! Head for the hills! Wake stumbled, caught up in an avalanche of thoughts, struggled to keep his mind off. To turn his mind off. He forced himself to calm down, to focus. He picked up the typewritten pages and started to read them. He moved away from the surrounding trees, using the moonlight to see better, frowning at what he saw. The pages were from a manuscript, a work in progress. Departure, the title of the book he intended to write, a book he had been unable to write even a page of. Just the title was all he had, but somebody had already started to work on it. Wake squinted at one of the pages and checked again to make sure. It was just too weird. There it was, though, at the bottom of the right corner. Wake, page 2. Wake's legs wobbled so badly that he had to hold onto a tree for support. His fingernails clawing at the bark, as though assuring himself that this tree, this one thing, was real. He must have really banged his head, because none of this made sense. He took a deep breath, straightening up, and pushed his hair back with one hand. He started reading. His hands were shaking by the time he was finished, but he read every word. The manuscript page described a man walking through the woods at night. A man attacked on that walk by an axe murderer. Blood dripped from the blade of the axe. Blood black as night. It even sounded like Wake's style. Wake looked around. He was alone except for the wind and the surrounding trees swaying in the darkness, branches rattling against each other like finger bones in a graveyard. Turn off your imagination, Wake. Nothing and nobody here but you. Definitely no man with an axe lurking in the brush. No maniac escaped from the local asylum seeking payback. That was another dream, another nightmare, another book someday maybe, but nothing more. Wake started walking again. He glanced behind him, moving faster now. He promised himself that he would keep up a steady pace so that he wouldn't give in to panic, but he had broken so many promises to himself. Wake ran faster now, legs pumping as he listened for footsteps behind him. Worst vacation ever. 2 weeks off a year, and Blaine had to spend it driving around in an RV with his in-laws from Tokyo. People acted like they never had seen a redwood tree, and his mother-in-law found every jerkwater town cute. Nothing cute about Bright Falls, just redneck dopes asking him what kind of mileage he got in the Winnebago. Didn't help that his wife Asiko's spastic colon was kicking up with all the fast food, making her totally useless. It all fell on Blaine. He wanted to barrel on to Reno or Ashland, someplace with a sizzler or some nightlife, but his in-laws had seen the mountain turnout and wanted to watch the sunset. Like the sun never set in Japan. Fine, Blaine stayed in the RV while the three of them stood against the railing taking pictures. Jeez, it got dark up here fast in Nowheresville. 1 minute it was twilight, and the next... Okay, so... Wake has woken up following the car crash. Now, as we all know, between him diving into the lake and him crashing his car, there's actually a lot of stuff that happened, but we'll get to that in a bit. This is getting a little intense. Let's put you right there. Okay, so, kind of a short chapter, not particularly long, but does something that I actually really like. So, okay, the implication in Alan Wake when he wakes up from the car crash is that he definitely has a concussion. Like, 100%. Without a doubt, this boy is concussed. Now, in the game, it really only kind of comes up as just, like, him occasionally having, like, a pang of a headache. But something that the book does that I think is really neat is several times throughout, at the very least, this first chapter, where Wake has just kind of woken up in a daze, he kind of lets his mind wander when certain things happen. Kind of showing that he's unfocused, even in, like, the panic of Alice being missing. His mind is just, his head's not working right, basically. He's just like, okay, let me write a note. She's just like, hey, it's Alan Wake, my wife's missing, I'm going into the woods, let me put that under the windshield wiper, and then the whole fucking car falls off the goddamn cliff, and he just stares at it as it does. He's just like, well, shit. Um, otherwise, this whole chapter is basically just like just him post diving into the lake, post what's the word I'm looking for? Car crash, just kind of like getting his bearings back. And of course, what happens once he gets his bearing back? What happens once he gets his bearings? We get some pages. For anybody who is not familiar with the mechanics of Alan Wake, typewritten pages are a collectible that you find over the course of the story. They generally talk about things that have either happened, are happening elsewhere, or are about to happen. And are part of the game's core mystery, where Alan is finding all of these pages of a story he ostensibly wrote describing events that are actually happening. Now, one thing that the book likes to do is, at the end of certain chapters, it will put in one of the typewritten pages from Departure. Occasionally they're ones from the games, occasionally they're ones from... I think it uses a couple that are only in the Alan Wake files, and then sometimes it just puts in like ones that aren't from either, that are just new ones. That whole bit about the guy with his in-laws and his Winnebago and everything is presented as a typewritten page. Now, this isn't one that you find in the game. I think this one might be in the Alan Wake files, but we'll have to see when we actually get around to that. But this could also just be one that is specific to this book. What this particular page represents, probably, like, here's the thing. So in Alan Wake, the main mooks of the game, the antagonist, the henchmen of the game's antagonistic force, are called Taken. And they are people who are taken over by the Dark Presence, are essentially spiritually hollowed out and replaced with just supernatural malice, right? Thing is, these people got to come from somewhere. There's implications in the game that there's a lot of instances of people going missing in Bright Falls during this time, people just straight up disappearing. And this particular typewritten page at the end of this seems to imply that there are some maybe not quite as local victims of the Dark Presence. So, with Taken, we're going to go ahead and get into some of the deeper details of Taken as we go along. But basically, it's just this whole thing where it's just like the darkness can't really create beings, so it has to take over beings, like people. So there needs to be people to take over within the context of the story. Now, this is kind of where one of sort of like the moral dilemmas of Alan Wake as a character kind of comes into play. Because here's the thing. As we'll find out, everything that's happening in this story is happening because Alan wrote it. It's not a situation where he's just like, oh, I have like this premonition to see events that are going to happen. No, he's not writing it because they happen. They're happening because he's writing it. So that means that characters present within the story that undergo, like, traumatic events or have like unfortunate backstories or indeed get killed, at least part of that is on Alan. Now it's a question to ask of just like, is he justified in doing this? You know, he mentions that just like, hey, I can't just write a story where things just magically turn out fine, because then things will super not turn out fine in reality. People need to die. There need to be close calls. So he has to essentially bring up people who are destined to be killed off. Now, the morality of this does not necessarily go undiscussed in the text of the game. There is a character who we will meet later on. I think he's in like episode 3 of the game. Once you go to meet with Rose at Sparkling River Estates, who resents Alan for the role that he is effectively playing here. So we'll save a lot more of the discussion there for that, because that's actually, that character is, I talk a lot about like what's some of my favorite characters. That particular character that like a lot of these questions come up about is probably one of my favorite characters in the game, like in terms of like what he represents in the story and just sort of like where he comes from and like what his goals and motivations are. All right, let's get back in there. One more chapter. Maybe. I might do more. Who knows? We've already restarted the footage, so it's fine. Chapter 5. Wake crouched over, hands resting on his knees, his chest on fire as he tried to catch his breath. Still going? Yeah, it is. Gotta hit the gym, Wake. Do some cardio. Maybe take a spinning class. He started to smile, then remembered why he was here in the middle of the woods, alone. He thought of Alice and her terror of the darkness, hoped that wherever she was, there was light. He started walking in the direction of the gas station. Walking fast was smarter than running, allowing him to keep a steady pace. Keep moving, a mantra to get him through the long night until he was reunited with Alice. No doubts, no fears, just the certainty that he would find her. Anything else, any other thought, was a whirlpool of madness that threatened to pull him under. The sound of crickets rose around him, a tidal wave of sound rising and falling. Male crickets swaying away, looking for a mate. Pick me, me, me. Just as suddenly the sound changed, shifted. Wake thought he heard someone typing away in the distance. Someone just as insistent as the crickets, tapping away. He patted the pages he had found, the pages of a manuscript he didn't remember writing, pages tucked into a pocket of his jacket. The wind rose, blowing across him, turning his sweat cold. He looked around at the darkness, the trees so close, blotting out the stars, hiding a deeper darkness. There was not even a question of stepping off the path that wound through them, no shortcuts. Don't stray from the path, Wake. The awareness of that truth as sudden and definite as if someone had spoken the words. Something scurried in the underbrush, and Wake had to remind himself to breathe. His head throbbed where he had hit the steering wheel in the crash. He didn't remember driving. He touched his forehead, winced. That much was real. Keep moving. A damp mist hung over the ground, thickening as he walked. Wake staggered as pain shot through his head, his eyes unfocused for a moment. His vision speckled with tiny flares of light. There was a buzzing in his ears, like being caught inside a hornet's nest. He tried walking, but the ground shook, a tremor that sent him to his knees. The buzzing in his head had become a roar as the ground rolled under him. Alice had talked about a volcano under Cauldron Lake, but it was supposed to be dormant. Wake got to his feet. Keep going. No matter what, keep going. He glimpsed a man up ahead. Then he was gone, lost in the mist. "Hey!" shouted Wake. "I need help!" He ran forward, the mist swirling around him. "Anybody there? Please, I've been in an accident!" The mist thinned out. Wake was still alone. Up ahead, though, there were lights. A good sign, he thought, moving faster now, half stumbling in his haste. Maybe he wouldn't have to hike all the way to the gas station to find a phone. The trail opened up, leaving the thick forest behind. The trees spread out now. In the distance, Wake could see a logging camp surrounded by a high chain-link fence. He was running now, eager. There had to be people there. A phone. Huge machines stood between stacks of cut logs, battered loaders and claw-armed backhoes and gigantic bulldozers, their treads crusted with rust and dirt. A crane towered above them all, a sentinel in the darkness. The camp office was off to the side, a converted trailer at the edge of a deep ravine. Wake was closer now, close enough to see that the massive stacks of logs were at least 12 feet high, flanked by neat piles of cut lumber. 50-gallon drums lay scattered across the yard, as though tossed aside by an angry giant. The yard was dark, but the modular office was lit. It was fucking lit. The door was only open a crack, but the light was a relief after traveling through the dark for hours. Now he knew how Alice felt when the lights went out. There was such a sense of relief in the light's glow, of normality, of safety, which was ridiculous and primitive, but it was true. Seeing the lights on the inside the trailer made it even better. Wake could hear the trailer door squeaking as the wind moved it back and forth. Put his hands on the fence. Anybody there? No answer. Wake scooted along the chain-link fence, looking for a gate, slipping on the rocks in his haste. Halfway down, he saw there where a fallen tree had landed on the fence line, crushing it halfway down. He hopped onto the tree trunk and carefully started up the incline. He'd been too eager, and his momentum nudged him off. He landed on his feet and tried it again, taking his time, wobbling at the very peak, then jumping down on the other side. He stuck the dismount, almost wanting to throw his hands over his head in Olympic triumph, anything to break the tension that had increased since he hit the ground, worse even than when he woke in the car. The mist hung over the camp in layers. A wood smell hung there, too. It should have been pleasant, fresh cut, alive, but instead the air felt dead. A toadstool stink. Logs lay jumbled everywhere, slippery with moisture, the footing treacherous. Sawdust covered the ground, stained with grease. He started towards the office, guiding himself by the glow that shone over the top of one of the piles of stacked logs. He kept getting lost in the maze of stacks, wandering through cul-de-sacs of logs and lumber that he couldn't squeeze through, forcing him to retreat and retrace his steps. On his third attempt to thread his way through to the light, he heard a sound, a human voice, crying out in fear and pain. Wake couldn't make out the words, but he knew the emotion behind them. He ran toward the sound, but found himself blocked again by a mountain of logs. He tried to scramble up them, desperate now, but the bracings holding the stack in place gave way, the logs rolling toward him. Barely had the time to jump aside. Give me 1 second. Okay, yeah. Where was I? Hold on. Barely had the time to jump aside, banging his elbow on a rusting iron girder lying on the ground. He watched as the logs rolled down the incline, gathering speed, then hurtled through the safety fence and into the ravine below. It sounded like thunder, and he hoped there was nothing and no one down there, because anything alive would be reduced to a smear of flesh. Another cry, closer this time. "I'm coming!" shouted Wake, his left arm numb where he had banged it. He ran through the stacks of lumber, round and round, until he finally saw a man lying at the end of one corridor of logs, a hunter in a red plaid shirt, wearing jeans and suspenders, one of his legs twisted under him. A rifle lay on the ground beside him. The hunter saw Wake too. He moaned, rose up on one elbow, beckoning. Wake hurried toward him. As he got closer, he could see there was something wrong with the hunter. The man's shirt wasn't red plaid. It was a plain gray shirt splattered with blood. "Help me, mister," blubbered the hunter, crawling toward Wake. "For the love of God, help!" Someone stepped out of the shadows. A tall, rangy man in boots and work clothes, with a single-bladed axe resting on one's shoulder. He ambled toward the hunter. "Carl Stuckey," he said, his voice contorted as though he were suffering through a convulsion. "Pleased to meet you." Wake stared at the man with the axe inching toward the hunter. This was Carl Stuckey, the man who they had rented the cabin from? "Stuckey, why are you doing this?" cried the hunter, fumbling with the rifle. You know me!" Stuckey moved closer, stepped into the moonlight at the end of the row of logs, but the shadows seemed to cling to him, clothing him in an oily darkness. Blood dripped from the blade of the axe, blood black as night. "Hey!" shouted Wake, looking around for a weapon. "Leave him alone!" Stuckey didn't react to Wake's voice. "I offer premium cabins," he squawked at the hunter, dragging out the word as he raised the axe. "Premium cabins in the Bright Falls area." Lying on the ground, the hunter raised the rifle, tried to hold it steady. He had bushy eyebrows, and they knitted with the effort. He fired once, threw the bolt, and fired again, the bullets hitting Stucky square in the chest. The gunshots rocked Stucky for an instant, but had no other effect. His body bent backwards slightly as he hefted the axe and then swung it down with full force. Wake flinched as the axe cleaved through the hunter's midsection. A slaughterhouse sound, moist and solid, spraying blood. Stucky put one foot on the hunter's neck as he struggled to pull the axe free, and Wake saw the hunter's eyelashes flutter in the dim light, his finger curling helplessly. Stucky jerked the axe out of the man, left rib bones glinting in the sawdust. He turned to Wake, his face a mask of shifting shadows. Things crawled in the dark of his eyes, but there was nothing human there. Wake backed up. "Carl Stucky, pleased to meet you." "Did you take Alice?" demanded Wake. "Did you do something to her?" "Premium cabins for rent." Stucky shambled toward him. "You son of a bitch, what did you do with Alice?" "Premium cabins," hissed Stucky, hefting the axe. "But a non-refundable reservation deposit is required." Wake tripped, sprawled in the sawdust, and scrambled back up again. He looked around now, wanting to run back to the gap in the fence. Even the darkness of the forest was more inviting than this place, but he wasn't sure which direction to go, afraid he was going to be caught in a box canyon of logs, with Stucky coming toward him. All he knew was that he had to get to the trailer. There would be a phone inside, and maybe a weapon. Something. "You fail to arrive," snarled Stucky, his face a torrent of shadows as he closed the gap between them. "You lose the deposit." Wake ran. He dodged between the stacks of logs, emerged into a clearing, and stood there, looking around, trying to decide how to get to the trailer. He darted between two long rows of logs, panting now, more than from fear than exertion. He glanced behind him. No Stucky. He slowed, slightly. Cried out as a shadow crossed over him. Stucky leaping from atop one row to another, cackling. "During your stay, I recommend Nordic walking." Wake made a break for it, heard Stucky land heavily behind him, but didn't look back. "Proven health benefits." The office was just ahead. A sign on the outside wall declared, 87 days since a work-related accident. Think! Safety first! Wake scrambled up the steps, taking them two at a time. He threw open the door, slammed it behind him, and locked it. It's good to know that Wake goes upstairs with the same urgency running from an axe murderer as he does for the possibility of getting fucked. He threw open the door, slammed it behind him, and locked it. The axe blade crashed through the door, barely missing Wake's face. The axe squeaked, glinting in the light, as Stucky twisted it free. Wake pushed a file cabinet over, blocking the door as the blade slammed through it again. He looked frantically around the office, grabbed a heavy metal flashlight off a desk strewn with time cards and styrofoam coffee cups. A revolver was visible in a half-open drawer. The hunter's rifle had been useless against Stucky, but Wake snatched it up anyway, emptied a box of ammo into his jacket pocket, too. He heard Stucky walk away from the door, lurching down the stairs. Wake picked up the telephone, praying for a dial tone. Yes! He dialed 911. While the phone at the other end rang, he bent down, picked up a paper from the floor. Another manuscript page for departure. Of course. Breadcrumbs for Hansel and Gretel, only Gretel was missing. He stuffed the page in his pocket, angry now as the 911 line continued to ring. Continued to ring? What? Anyway, continued to ring. Answer the goddamn... Deputy Janes, Bright Falls Sheriff Station, how may I need help. I'm in... Sir, what's the... The line went dead. Through the window, Wake could see the phone dangling from the pole outside, torn loose. The phone line, I mean. He looked up when he heard an engine roar to life. A bulldozer rumbled toward the trailer, smoke belching from the exhaust pipes of the diesel engine. The trailer rocked as the bulldozer slammed into it. The trailer lurched, windows shattering. The lights went out. The trailer backed up, took another run. Full throttle this time. The blade of the bulldozer punched through the wall of the office, the engine revving as it slowly pushed the trailer toward the ravine. One wall buckled as the trailer tore free of its foundation, digging furrows in the earth as it was pushed closer and closer to the edge of the ravine. Wake made his way to the back door of the trailer. It was stuck. He kicked it until it flung open and he leapt out. He was lying with his face in the sawdust, heart pounding as the trailer tumbled over the edge, the bulldozer roaring after it. There was complete silence for a moment or two before Wake heard the bulldozer crash into the rocks far below. He sat there, trying to catch his breath, trying to make sense of what had happened. Stucky had killed a hunter, then tried to kill him. No reason for any of it, but Stucky was dead now. Had to be dead. Wake was out of danger. His heart still pounding, Wake reached into his jacket and pulled out the manuscript page he had taken from the desk earlier. Grabbed from the desk earlier, excuse me. The Taken stood before me. Excuse me. The Taken stood before me. It was impossible to focus on it. It was bleeding shadows like ink under water, like a cloud of blood from a shark bite. I was terrified. I squeezed the flashlight, willing the Taken not to come any closer. Suddenly something gave and the light seemed to shine brighter. Wake got up slowly, legs wobbly. The page seemed connected to his fights with Stucky. Bleeding shadows. That's what Stucky had looked like, the essence of darkness. Wake turned on the flashlight, the light soothing, light and darkness. But the word in the manuscript. Taken. Taken by what? Wake walked unsteadily through the gap in the fence torn by the bulldozer and peered over the edge of the precipice. The bulldozer was dimly visible, lying upside down at the bottom of the ravine, its headlights still on. A raven cawed from somewhere in the darkness, the sound echoing, and Wake turned, walked back into the logging camp. He could see the glow of the gas station through the trees, still far away but closer. There would be a phone there, maybe an attendant, working late. The ground trembled. Two men emerged from behind a pile of logs. They too were wreathed in shadows, just like Stucky, darkness crawling over their faces. One of the men whipped off to the side, flanking Wake. The other came straight at him. Wake drew the revolver, the gun shaking in his grip. The flanking man moved quicker than the other one. He was a bulky logger wearing high-laced boots and overalls, a double-sided axe in his hand. The one coming right at him carried an enormous crowbar, which he tapped softly into the palm of his other hand. Wake pointed the gun at him. Shot him in the heart. No effect. The hunter was closer now, Wake backing up. He turned the flashlight on the hunter, hoping to see him more clearly. The man shrank from the light, threw his arm over his eyes. Wake kept the flashlight on the hunter, and his blood-caked clothes seemed to crackle and smolder. Wake shot him. He shot him in the face, and the hunter's whole body flared brightly for an instant, then dissolved into dying motes of light. Wake heard footsteps, dodged, and caught the breeze from the logger's axe as it swooshed past, missing him by inches. He turned the flashlight beam back on the logger. He flinched, darted away. For minutes, the two of them danced around the logging yard, feinting and counter-feinting. Wake tried to get away, stumbling, tried to make it through the gate on the other side, but the logger was quick and knew the terrain better. Twice he surprised Wake, once jumping down from a pile of lumber, the blade chunking into a pile of 2x4s, so close that Wake gagged at the sour smell of the man. Wake drove him back with a flashlight, but the beam alone was not enough to dissolve the logger, and Wake's shots were wild, missing him entirely. He had only one bullet left in the revolver now, and no time to reload before the man was on him. Wake edged toward the clear area of the camp, someplace where the logger would have to confront him directly. He turned the flashlight off. No telling how long the batteries would last. The sound of crickets rose again, and Wake's hands were slick with sweat. He kept turning around, looking into the darkness. He almost didn't see him in time, the logger visible only as a deeper darkness in the night. It was the moonlight that gave him away, the glint of moonlight off the upraised axe. Wake shone the flashlight on the man, saw the logger's outline contract in the light, and shot him. The man flared, then dissolved like the dying moment of a fireworks display, leaving nothing behind but fading shadows. No ashes, no bones, no clothes, no axe. No evidence that the logger had ever been there. Wake went over to make sure, sifted the sawdust between his hands. Nothing. There was a buzzing in Wake's ears, louder than the crickets, a long, undulating sound that was the mournful cry of madness. Wake had never fired a gun outside a pistol range, and even then had only done it as research for his books rather than pleasure. Now he just killed two men, or two whatever they were, and if he thought too much about it, he was going to be sick. He reloaded the pistol, hands fumbling. He dropped 2 bullets in the sawdust, retrieved them, and blew them clean before inserting them in the chambers. He was going to need every bullet. Alice looked through the viewfinder, lining up the shot. Cauldron Lake was breathtaking. Something caught her eye, a figure standing in the shadows behind the cabin, like a thin woman in a black dress. She lowered the camera and looked again. No one was there, just a collection of bushes that looked vaguely human. She shook her head and laughed. Okay. So, one of the issues with adapting video games into novelized forms, especially like direct adaptations like this, where you kind of have to follow the narrative curve of the game, is that you need to write about the gameplay. So So what we're going to be getting in some of these chapters is we're going to be getting basically a walkthrough of the levels of the game, written in such a way that like moments in those levels where really you're just kind of alone with your thoughts have to be written with some kind of narrative purpose in mind. People are laughing in the other room. Now, Alan Wake is not the most difficult game to do this for. There's a lot of like ambience to these sections that take place in the forest. There's a lot of like internal monologuing that Wake does that kind of gives you a good idea of like how to progress the story in such a way that like scenes where nothing's really happening can still have like narrative purpose. Like the whole bit of him just being like, oh, Stucky's dead, he has to be dead. Like that is essentially Wake's internal monologue if you walk over to the cliff to take a look at the logging office that had fallen over after getting pushed by the bulldozer. So Alan Wake as a book or as a game really helps the book along. It's a little bit more difficult to do this in other games where it's just like the standard gameplay loop is like walk through a couple hallways, find a group of enemies, shoot them all, walk through some more hallways. Like, I remember that was kind of a common criticism of Halo the Flood, which is the adaptation of the first game. If you were to just do a straight adaptation of the first Halo game, that would probably be pretty boring. So they have to punch it up a bit. Now, the scenes with Master Chief are still very Master Chief. You know, it's a lot of just, like, ducking and dodging, throwing grenades, dodging grenades, shooting, bang, bang. But then, like, you punch it up with perspectives from Captain Keyes, from the Covenant, from a character who is only sort of, like, half infected by the Flood due to the infector form that he was grabbed by being weak, blah, 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 blah. This is all to say that, you know, it becomes clear where it's just like, you know, they're kind of trying to fill things out to a certain extent. Like, I mentioned it before, like, certain things being redundant. I think they say the trailer, like, 3 or 4 times within, like, 4 lines in the book. Like, to a certain extent, it does seem like we're kind of stalling for time in a couple cases. Again, this isn't necessarily... This is more of a criticism of, like, something that is going to unfortunately be inherent to adapting a video game to written word, you know? Not much you can do about that. We now meet Carl Stuckey proper. Well, not proper. Carl Stuckey is now a Taken. Taken are creatures filled with darkness. There's no help in them. You can't do anything to save them. You would just have to kill them, unfortunately. Now here's the thing. And this was clearly a decision made by, like, when they were adapting this to the novel form. In the game, the dream at the beginning with the hitchhiker is your tutorial. It's where the mysterious light, tells you, hey, these guys can't be heard if they're wreathed in darkness. You can't do anything about that. You have to burn the darkness away with the light. So here's a flashlight. Go fucking nuts. And it's just like, even though you've burnt the light away, he's still going to keep coming at you, so you got to fucking shoot him. Here's a gun. Take the gun. But instead here, Stucky helps tutorialize the mechanics of the game. Where we have the encounter between him and the hunter, which doesn't quite happen that way in the game. By the time we find Stucky murdering a man, the man is already dead. He doesn't have the opportunity to shoot the guy. But we have this scene with the hunter firing 2 rounds dead center in Stucky's chest, and it having absolutely no fucking effect. And then Wake finding the page that's like, hey, yo, Taken, pretty fucked up, shine a light on him, buddy. And then he does, and then he gets a chance to do that, and like, hey, that's a pretty neat mechanic, huh? You shine light on him, you can blast him. So this chapter is essentially like, hey, this is the book version of Alan Wake's tutorial level. This is where he is going to learn how to fight darkness with light and firearms. Which, I mean, is kind of a fun concept, you know? Like, I feel like if you're gonna have to write several chapters where Alan Wake does nothing but run through dark forests, shine flashlights on dudes, and blast them away, you gotta at least write him figuring out how to do that. So I can kind of forgive them having what is essentially a tutorial level in their book. I think that's kind of funny, actually. But yeah. That's going to be where we're going to kind of like end things here. I don't know if this ever comes up, but we also get the, let me. We also get a look at the Taken's tendency to just fucking say shit. Just like, it has no purpose in the moment, but they're just saying things. What the fuck was that? Something just fucking hop off me? What was that? Oh well, I might be hallucinating. And for the record, my intonations in doing Stucky's lines is not entirely... Like, I tried to kind of match the way that the Taken talk in the game. Hopefully without fucking destroying my throat, but we'll see how that works out for me later. But it's this really cool effect of just like, it's pitched down, it's pitched up, they sound like they're struggling through the sentences. This is shown in the book through use of like ellipses and italics and like extending letters and word sounds. Honestly, Rick Burroughs does a pretty good job of really kind of like nailing the speech patterns of Taken. But, you know, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up here for right now. Alan Wake's journey through the night will continue. Now, because we're doing this on Friday, it is going to be sharing this slot, this day, with the alternating Team Catpull streams. So, Alan Wake, the novelization is going to be kind of a bi-weekly thing, unless, of course, they give me a date for when the second game is coming out, and I see it, I'm just like, oh shit, I need to read this faster. In which case, I might move a few things around to give myself more time for this. But that's going to be it for today. I want to thank everybody for coming by the stream. I hope you all had a good time. I'd like to thank our new followers for joining us, one of which is an old follower who is here under a new name. If you enjoyed the stream, you can subscribe here on Twitch. We have special emotes for subscribers. You can also follow me on Twitter and Tumblr at AcidXShark. That's AcidXShark, where I post all the streams after they as they happen. I post them after they happen on my YouTube, which you can find under the same name. Art for the stream was done by Team Catpull, who you can find on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube at Team Catpull. That's TEAMCATPLE. Don't email them. They'll email you if you send them a commission form. Like, you should do that. You should get a commission from Team Capel. They're great. Audrey and B are so good. And they're great friends. Love them so much. Send them money to get art. They do really good stuff. They did this little chatty shark boy. Look at him. Look at his subtle hip sway. Be mesmerized by it. Upcoming streams. Tomorrow we're going to be doing Fatal Frame. And then next week we will be finishing up Yorha Dark Apocalypse. Next Thursday we will be continuing A Plague Tale Requiem. And next Friday, ideally we'll be doing Bayonetta. I know things have been kind of like all over the place with Audrey and B, with like their schedules kind of being upended by shit occasionally. So hopefully we'll be able to get in some Bayo time, and I hope you tune in for that. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here, and I'll see you next time on the Shark Stream. Same Shark time, same Shark channel. Take care, everybody.